The flashing lights of police cars cut through the morning mist, turning the peaceful forest clearing into a chaotic scene of shouting officers and news vans. Ben Torres stood frozen, his weathered hands now bound behind his back with cold metal handcuffs that bit into his skin. The confusion in his eyes gave way to desperation as he watched his 6-year-old daughter being led toward a government vehicle, her small face streaked with tears. "Daddy," Maya's voice cracked with fear as a social worker gently but firmly guided her away. "I want my daddy." 20 yards away, Alexandra Hartwell was being escorted toward a black SUV, her designer clothes now rumpled, her composed facade crumbling as she locked eyes with Ben across the chaos. An elderly man in an expensive suit stood before a wall of reporters, his voice carrying with practiced authority. "My granddaughter Alexandra Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Environmental Corporation, has been held against her will for nearly 3 weeks by this man," Theodore Hartwell announced, gesturing toward Ben with undisguised contempt. "We have evidence that he orchestrated her kidnapping for financial gain, exploiting her vulnerability after she suffered an accident in these woods." Cameras flashed as Ben was pushed into the back of a police car, the door slamming with a finality that echoed through the clearing. His last glimpse was of Maya's terrified face pressed against a car window, and Alexandra being pulled into the SUV by men in dark suits, her eyes never leaving his until the door closed between them. The morning mist clung to the ancient Douglas firs like whispered secrets, and the only sound breaking Cedar Falls wilderness was the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath worn hiking boots. Ben Torres moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of a man who belonged here, his weathered hands collecting dry kindling, while 6-year-old Maya's crayon-bright maple leaf drawing rustled in his breast pocket. The October air carried the sharp scent of pine and the promise of winter, but the sun breaking through the canopy above kept the morning pleasantly cool rather than cold. Ben paused, watching a deer and her fawn pick their way through the underbrush before disappearing into the shadows. He smiled, making a mental note to tell Maya about them when he returned to the cabin. These small moments, the wildlife sightings, the changing colors of the forest, the seasonal shifts in the ecosystem, were the lessons he most enjoyed sharing with his daughter. Not just because they kindled her natural curiosity, but because they connected her to this place that had become their sanctuary after Anna's death. Back at the cabin, he found Maya at the kitchen table, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she carefully colored another maple leaf, adding it to the growing collection taped to their refrigerator. "Breakfast before school, squirrel," he said, setting down his gathered kindling by the wood stove. Maya looked up, her smile revealing a recently lost front tooth. "Can we have pancakes with the blueberries we picked? 20 minutes until the bus comes." Ben checked his watch, a practical timepiece that had survived countless forest excursions. "How about quick oatmeal today? Pancakes on Saturday. Promise with extra syrup." Maya negotiated, already clearing away her coloring supplies. "Deal." Ben ruffled her hair as he passed, moving to the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had adapted to solo parenting through necessity rather than choice. As Maya ate, Ben sorted through the mail he'd collected from their box at the end of the long driveway yesterday. His expression darkened as he opened an official-looking envelope. Another notice about the property taxes. The ranger's salary barely covered their basic needs, and Anna's medical bills had depleted what little savings they'd had. The cabin, Anna's family legacy and their only real asset, was increasingly at risk. "Daddy, you're making the worried face again," Maya observed between spoonfuls of oatmeal. Ben quickly shifted his expression, tucking the letter into his pocket. "Just thinking about work stuff, squirrel, nothing important." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "Better get your backpack. Bus will be here soon." After seeing Maya off at the end of their long driveway, Ben returned to the quiet cabin. He moved to the small desk in the corner of the living room where he kept his ranger documentation and pulled out a folder labeled Hartwell Environmental Cedar Falls Project. Inside were newspaper clippings and environmental impact reports and his own handwritten notes about the corporation's plan to clear-cut nearly 50,000 acres of Oregon wilderness, including the area surrounding their home. He'd been fighting this battle for almost 2 years now, attending town meetings, gathering signatures, researching legal precedents about protected wilderness areas. As head ranger for this section of forest, he had some influence, but nothing compared to the political connections and financial resources of Hartwell Environmental. Ben's eyes drifted to the photo on his desk. Anna smiling from a hospital bed, Maya curled beside her, both looking at the camera with identical brown eyes. It had been taken 3 weeks before Anna lost her battle with cancer. The experimental treatment that might have saved her had been far beyond their financial reach, even if they'd sold everything they owned. "I'm still trying, Anna," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm keeping our promise." His phone rang, breaking the moment. It was the forestry department calling him in for an unexpected shift. Another ranger had called in sick, and they needed coverage for the eastern section. Ben gathered his gear, his mind already shifting to the responsibilities ahead, trying not to dwell on the financial worries that grew heavier each month. 42 floors above Portland's bustling financial district, Alexandra Hartwell stood at the window of her corner office, watching the city below with detached interest. From this height, people looked like ants, cars like toys. An appropriate metaphor, she thought, for how the board viewed the communities affected by their corporate decisions. "Ms. Hartwell, they're ready for you in the conference room." Her assistant's voice came through the intercom, perfectly professional and carefully neutral. Alexandra, Alex, to the very few people she considered friends, straightened her tailored blazer and gathered the presentation materials for the Cedar Falls logging project. The custom-made leather portfolio in her hands contained documents that would effectively condemn thousands of acres of old-growth forest to destruction. Her grandfather had made it abundantly clear that this project would proceed with or without her approval, but as CEO, her signature was required on the final authorization. The conference room fell silent as she entered. 8 men and 2 women in expensive suits sat around a polished mahogany table, electronic devices and coffee cups placed with precise geometry before them. At the head of the table, Theodore Hartwell, 82 years old and still the true power behind Hartwell Environmental, watched her with cold expectation. "Alexandra," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "we've been waiting." "I apologize for the delay," she replied, her voice carrying the cultivated authority of someone who had been groomed since childhood to command rooms like this. "I was reviewing the latest environmental impact assessments for Cedar Falls." Theodore's expression hardened slightly. "I believe we've exhausted that particular discussion. Today's meeting is to finalize the implementation timeline, not revisit settled decisions." Alex took her seat, opening her portfolio with deliberate slowness. "I've found some concerning data regarding endangered species habitats in the proposed cutting zones." She distributed several reports, ignoring the barely concealed size around the table. "Section 47B contains nesting sites for the spotted owl, which, as you know, is protected under federal regulations." "Yes," Theodore interrupted. "Our legal team has already addressed this by modifying the cutting boundaries by 12 acres. The matter is resolved." 12 acres is insufficient, according to the latest biological surveys, Alex countered, sliding another document across the table. "And there's also the matter of the watershed impact." A board member, Jensen from Acquisitions, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Ms. Hartwell, we've already delayed this project by 6 months to accommodate various environmental concerns. Every month of delay costs this company millions in potential revenue. And rushing forward could cost us hundreds of millions in federal fines and legal battles," Alex replied evenly. "Not to mention the reputation damage." Theodore tapped the table with his fountain pen, a signal Alex recognized from childhood as a warning. "The decision has been made, Alexandra. The Cedar Falls project proceeds as scheduled. The signing ceremony with local officials is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Your presence is not optional." The meeting continued, but Alex's thoughts drifted to the document hidden in her personal safe, her Oxford thesis on sustainable forestry practices written under a pseudonym to prevent family interference. It had won international recognition in environmental circles that would be horrified to learn the author was the heir to one of the most environmentally destructive corporations in the Pacific Northwest. When the meeting concluded, Theodore gestured for Alex to remain. Once they were alone, his carefully maintained public persona dropped. "This continued resistance is becoming tedious, Alexandra," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You are the 4th generation of Hartwells to lead this company. Your position comes with responsibilities to our shareholders and our family legacy." "Our legacy," Alex replied carefully, "could be innovation in sustainable practices rather than destruction." Theodore's laugh was short and without humor. "Your mother filled your head with these idealistic notions. Reality requires difficult decisions for progress. Sentimentality about trees doesn't build economies or create jobs. And short-sighted extraction doesn't create sustainable economies. Alex countered, knowing she was treading dangerous ground but unable to remain silent. Theodore's eyes narrowed. Tomorrow you will sign those documents as CEO of Hartwell Environmental, or I will call an emergency board meeting to reevaluate your position. He stood straightening his perfectly tailored suit. Your father understood what was required of him. It's time you did the same. After he left, Alex remained seated, staring at the Portland skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her phone buzzed with messages, reminders about tomorrow's ceremony, questions from department heads, an invitation to a charity gala. The weight of expectation pressed down like a physical force. She pulled out her personal phone, not the company device monitored by IT, and looked at the email she'd received that morning. An anonymous source had sent satellite imagery showing the true extent of damage from Hartwell's previous logging operation, far beyond what had been reported to regulatory agencies. It was the final piece of evidence she'd been gathering for months. Alex made her decision. She typed a quick message to her private attorney, then deleted it immediately after sending. Tomorrow's signing ceremony would proceed exactly as planned, but Alexandra Hartwell would not be there to sign anything. In her apartment that evening, Alex packed methodically. A small bag with only essentials, practical clothing purchased anonymously, basic toiletries, her emergency cash reserve, and a backup phone. She left her designer clothes, jewelry, and electronics behind. Whatever happened next, Alexandra Hartwell, as she currently existed, would effectively disappear. As she prepared to walk away from a life of wealth and power, Alex found herself thinking about her mother, the brilliant environmental scientist who had married into the Hartwell dynasty with hopes of changing it from within, only to be marginalized and eventually broken by the experience. Before her death from cancer 3 years ago, she had made Alex promise to find a way to correct the damage the family company had done. Tomorrow, Alex whispered to the empty apartment. I finally keep that promise. She set her alarm for 4:30 a.m., early enough to be gone before her grandfather's daily check-in call, with enough time to disappear before anyone realized she was missing. Her destination, Cedar Falls Wilderness. If she was going to fight to save a forest, she needed to see exactly what was at stake. Alexandra slipped out of her apartment building at 4:47 a.m., the pre-dawn air sharp against her face. She'd chosen her outfit carefully. Hiking boots purchased 6 months ago and broken in during secret weekend excursions. Jeans without designer labels. A practical fleece jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. Nothing that would connect her to the polished CEO who graced corporate annual reports and business magazine covers. The private car she'd arranged through a non-company service waited at the curb, driver discreetly avoiding eye contact as she slid into the back seat. Forest Service Station at Cedar Falls, she instructed, using a slightly altered accent. I'm meeting a hiking group. As the car pulled away from her high-rise, Alex fought the urge to look back. Everything she'd ever known was in that building. The carefully constructed life of Alexandra Hartwell, heir to an environmental destruction empire. By noon, Theodore would realize she wasn't coming to the signing ceremony. By evening, the corporate security team would be tracking her movements. She had perhaps 12 hours of freedom before the machine of Hartwell Environmental began hunting for its missing CEO. The city gave way to suburbs, then to the lush Oregon countryside. Alex watched the landscape transform through the car window, the growing light revealing hills shrouded in morning mist. She'd researched Cedar Falls extensively, not just for the company's logging project, but for her own understanding of what was at stake. The area contained some of the oldest Douglas firs in the state watersheds that supplied drinking water to 3 counties and biodiversity that ecological researchers had been studying for decades. You can drop me at the ranger station, she told the driver as they approached the small town of Cedar Falls. I'll meet my group there. There was no hiking group, of course. Once the car disappeared down the road, Alex shouldered her backpack and walked to the small rental car agency at the edge of town. She'd reserved a vehicle weeks ago under one of her carefully maintained alternate identities, safety measures she'd established after discovering the first evidence of her grandfather's illegal environmental practices. Behind the wheel of the nondescript SUV, Alex consulted her maps. The logging project's proposed boundaries encompassed nearly 50,000 acres, but the most ecologically valuable section, and the area she believed contained evidence of protected species habitats lay in the northeastern quadrant. If she could document what was actually there beyond what the company's selectively edited environmental reports showed, she might have additional ammunition for the legal battle to come. The Forest Service roads grew increasingly rough as Alex drove deeper into the wilderness. Cedar Falls lived up to its name, with cascading streams cutting through ancient forest stands. She passed several no trespassing signs marked with Hartwell Environmental logos, ignoring them with grim satisfaction. Technically, as CEO, she wasn't trespassing on company survey lands, though that legal distinction would hardly matter to the security teams if they found her. After an hour of careful navigation, Alex parked at a small turnout and consulted her GPS. The area she wanted to document was approximately 2 miles north through increasingly dense forest. She checked her equipment, camera with telephoto lens sample collection containers, her field journal water, and emergency supplies. The weight of the backpack felt reassuring against her shoulders as she locked the car and set off along a barely visible trail. The forest enveloped her immediately, ancient trees stretching hundreds of feet above undergrowth, thick with ferns and berry bushes, the air heavy with the scent of moss and earth. For the first time in months, Alexandra felt herself truly breathing. Away from boardrooms and spreadsheets, from Theodore's cold expectations and the constant performance of corporate leadership, something inside her unclenched. She hiked steadily for nearly an hour, stopping occasionally to photograph interesting specimens or make notes in her journal. Her Oxford training in environmental science emerged naturally here, away from the corporate world that had forced her to suppress it. She identified rare fungi varieties, noted evidence of deer and elk populations, and documented the complex forest canopy layers that created habitat for countless species. The trail grew steeper as she approached a ridgeline that would give her views across the valley. According to her research, this vantage point would allow her to photograph several key watershed features that the company's logging plans had suspiciously omitted. She moved more carefully now, the ground increasingly rocky and unstable beneath her boots. At the ridge's edge, Alex gasped. The view was more spectacular than any satellite imagery had suggested. Ancient forests stretching for miles, morning light filtering through mist that hung in the valleys, a pair of eagles circling above a distant cliff face. And there, cutting through the heart of it all, was the blue ribbon of the Cedar River, the waterway that Theodore's plans would inevitably contaminate with logging runoff. She pulled out her camera, carefully documenting the landscape with geotagged photos. Each image was potential evidence, each frame ammunition against her grandfather's destructive vision. Alex was so absorbed in her work that she didn't immediately notice when the ridge beneath her began to shift. The first warning was a subtle movement, loose stones sliding against her boot, then a crack like a gunshot in the quiet forest. Alex lurched backward, but it was already too late. The section of ridgeline she stood on gave way, sending her sliding down a steep slope of loose rock and soil. She frantically grabbed for handholds, her fingers scraping against stone and roots, as gravity pulled her toward the ravine below. Her fall ended with a sickening impact, her ankle twisting beneath her as she landed on a narrow ledge 20 feet below the trail. Pain shot up her leg, bright and immediate. Alex lay still for a moment, assessing the damage through short, panicked breaths. Nothing felt broken, but her ankle was already swelling, and blood seeped through tears in her jeans where rocks had scraped her skin. "Help!" she called, her voice sounding small against the vastness of the forest. "Is anyone there? Help!" Only forest sounds answered. Wind through branches, distant bird song, the mocking gurgle of a stream far below. Alex fumbled for her backpack, which had somehow stayed on her shoulders during the fall. The satellite phone she'd packed for emergencies had been crushed in the impact, its screen shattered beyond repair. Her regular phone showed no service bars. These remote forests were notorious for poor reception. Alex tried to stand, but her ankle collapsed beneath her weight, sending fresh waves of pain up her leg. She was stranded on a narrow ledge, injured, with no way to call for help and no one knowing where she'd gone. The irony wasn't lost on her. Alexandra Hartwell, who controlled billions in corporate assets, who could summon private jets and security teams with a single call, was now completely vulnerable and alone in the very wilderness her company planned to destroy. As morning stretched into afternoon, Alex's situation grew more precarious. The temperature was dropping as clouds gathered overhead, threatening rain. She'd managed to create a makeshift splint for her ankle using branches and strips torn from her jacket, but every movement sent pain shooting through her leg. Her water supply was limited, and the ledge offered no shelter from the elements. "Help!" she called again, her voice hoarser now from repeated attempts. "Is anyone out there?" This time, miraculously, she heard something. Not an answer, but the distant sound of movement through the forest above. Footsteps deliberate and steady coming along the trail she'd been following before her fall. "Down here!" Alex shouted with renewed energy. "Help! I'm down in the ravine!" The footsteps paused, then changed direction. A moment later, a man's face appeared at the edge of the ridge above her, weathered, bearded, with alert eyes that quickly assessed her situation. "Hold on," he called down. "Don't try to move." Ben Torres had been collecting firewood along the eastern forest boundary when he'd heard the cry for help. Years of ranger training kicked in as he quickly secured his climbing rope to a sturdy tree and rappelled down to the injured woman's position. His first impression was confusion. Her expensive hiking gear and obvious city mannerisms seemed oddly out of place in this remote section of forest miles from any marked trails. "That's a nasty fall you took," he said, kneeling to examine her injured ankle with practiced hands. "I'm Ben Torres, head ranger for this section. Can you tell me your name?" Alex hesitated, suddenly aware of the danger in revealing her identity. If this ranger recognized the Hartwell name connected her to the logging project. "Alex," she said finally, offering only her shortened first name. "I was hiking and the ridge gave way." Ben nodded, noting her reluctance, but focusing on the immediate problem. "You're lucky I was working in this area today. This section isn't on any public trails, and it's a good 5 miles from the nearest road access point." "I must have gotten turned around," Alex lied, wincing as Ben gently examined her ankle. "This looks like a severe sprain, possibly torn ligaments," he said. "You need medical attention, but getting you up this ravine and through 2 miles of rough terrain to my truck is going to be challenging." Alex glanced at her shattered satellite phone, then at the darkening sky. "I don't suppose there's cell service anywhere nearby." "Not for about 12 miles, Ben confirmed. "My radio's in my truck, and even that has spotty coverage out here." He looked up at the ridge, calculating. "I can get you out of this ravine with my climbing gear, but you won't be able to put weight on that ankle. My cabin is about a mile from here, closer than my truck. We can shelter there tonight, and I can drive you to the medical center in town tomorrow morning." Alex felt a flash of panic. Staying overnight in a stranger's cabin wasn't part of her plan. By tomorrow, Theodore's people would be searching for her. But her options were severely limited, and the throbbing pain in her ankle was growing worse. "Please," she whispered, the facade of confidence cracking slightly as another wave of pain washed over her. "I just need to get somewhere safe. I can't be found here." Something in her voice, the genuine fear behind the words, made Ben look more closely at the woman before him. Beneath the dirt and blood from her fall, he could see she was fighting to maintain composure. Her hiking clothes were high quality, but looked new, and despite her attempt to appear casual, there was something in her posture that spoke of someone accustomed to authority. More intriguingly, her backpack contained professional-grade camera equipment and what looked like scientific collection tools, not the usual tourist hiking gear. "Found by whom?" he asked quietly. Alex met his gaze, calculation visible behind her eyes. "It's complicated. I'm not doing anything illegal, I promise. I just can't be identified in this area right now." Ben's instincts, honed by years of assessing people in emergency situations, told him she was hiding something significant, but also that she wasn't a threat. Whatever her secrets, the immediate priority was medical attention for her injury. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. "First, let's get you somewhere safe and take care of that ankle." The journey to Ben's cabin was arduous. After helping Alex up the ravine using his climbing equipment, Ben fashioned a makeshift crutch from a sturdy branch, but she still needed to lean heavily against him as they slowly navigated the rough terrain. The proximity was uncomfortable for both of them. Alex unused to depending on anyone for physical support, Ben acutely aware of the mysterious woman whose weight pressed against his side. "You know these woods well," Alex observed during one of their brief rest stops, trying to distract herself from the pain. Ben nodded, scanning the forest with the automatic awareness of someone who considered it both workplace and home. "Been the head ranger here for 8 years. Before that, I worked Forest Service in Washington State." "You chose a beautiful area to protect," Alex said, genuinely appreciating the ancient trees surrounding them. Something in her choice of words made Ben glance at her with renewed interest. "Protect," not many visitors use that word, Most talk about enjoying or experiencing the forest. Alex realized her slip. I've always believed wilderness areas should be preserved, she said carefully. Once these old growth forests are gone, they can't be replaced. Exactly what I've been trying to explain to the Hartwell Corporation, Ben said, his voice taking on an edge. Their proposed logging operation would decimate this entire ecosystem. Alex felt a cold shock run through her. Of all the forest rangers in Oregon, she'd been found by one directly involved in fighting her family's company. She kept her expression neutral with effort. Hartwell Environmental, I've read about their Cedar Falls project. Then you've read the sanitized version, Ben replied, helping her over a fallen log. Their environmental impact reports conveniently omit the spotted owl nesting sites, the watershed damage, and the destruction of Native American heritage areas. The exact issues Alex had been raising in board meetings for months. She felt a strange mix of vindication and shame hearing them from this ranger's mouth. And no one's stopping them. Ben's laugh was short and bitter. David versus Goliath doesn't begin to cover it. They have teams of lawyers, political connections, and more money than God. We have community petitions and environmental regulations that they find loopholes in faster than we can file complaints. They continued in silence for several minutes, Alex's mind racing. This ranger likely had valuable information about the forest that even her secret research hadn't uncovered. Knowledge that could be crucial in her plan to stop the logging project. There it is, Ben said finally as a small cabin came into view through the trees. The structure was modest but well-maintained, with a covered porch and the smoke curling from a stone chimney. Not exactly luxury accommodations, but it's warm and dry. As they approached, the cabin door burst open and a small figure came running out. "Daddy, you're late for dinner. I already started the—" The little girl stopped short, her eyes widening at the sight of Alex leaning against her father. "Who's that? What happened?" "Maya, this is Alex. She had an accident in the forest and I'm helping her," Ben explained. "Alex, this is my daughter Maya." "Hi, Maya," Alex said, surprised by the presence of a child. Something about the girl's direct gaze and fearless curiosity reminded Alex of herself at that age before boarding schools and corporate grooming had taught her to hide her natural inquisitiveness. "Are you hurt like Mommy was?" Maya asked innocently. Alex saw Ben flinch almost imperceptibly at the question. "Maya," he said gently. "Alex hurt her ankle. It's different. Can you go get the first aid kit from the bathroom cabinet?" As Maya ran inside, Ben helped Alex up the porch steps. "Sorry about that," he said quietly. "Her mother, my wife, passed away 2 years ago, cancer." Maya sometimes connects any injury to that experience. "I'm so sorry," Alex said, genuinely moved by the pain evident in his voice. "You don't need to explain." Inside the cabin was simple but comfortable. A main room with a small kitchen area and living space centered around a wood stove with doors leading to what Alex presumed were bedrooms. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator and bookshelves lined one wall filled with field guides and ecology texts. It was nothing like the sterile luxury of her penthouse apartment, yet something about the space felt immediately more authentic. Ben helped her to the couch where Maya had already placed a colorful handmade quilt and was solemnly offering the first aid kit. "I'm going to need to examine your ankle properly," Ben said. "Maya, can you get our guests some water?" As Ben carefully removed her boot and sock, Alex got her first good look at the injury. Her ankle had swollen dramatically with dark bruising spreading across the skin. "You've got a grade 2 sprain at minimum," Ben assessed, gently probing the area. "Possibly torn ligaments. You really should get an x-ray, but with this swelling, we need to stabilize and elevate it first." "You seem to know what you're doing," Alex observed, wincing, as he wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency. "Wilderness first responder training," he explained, "plus plenty of practical experience with hiking injuries." He finished securing the bandage. "This needs ice elevation and complete rest for at least 48 hours. Alex felt a surge of panic. "I can't stay here for 2 days. I need to—" She stopped herself, realizing she was about to reveal too much. Ben raised an eyebrow. "You need to, what, return to a hiking trip you weren't properly prepared for, meet someone who doesn't know where you are? Or is it about whatever you were photographing in that restricted area?" Before Alex could respond, Maya returned with a glass of water and a childish determination to be helpful. "I can show you my drawings while you get better," she offered, already pulling a folder of artwork from a nearby shelf. The simple kindness of the child momentarily disarmed Alex. In her world of corporate politics and environmental advocacy, genuine interactions were rare. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. While Maya proudly displayed her artwork, Ben prepared a simple dinner. Alex watched the easy interaction between father and daughter, the seamless way they communicated and moved around each other in the small space. Despite their modest surroundings, there was a richness to their relationship that made her childhood in Hartwell Mansion seem sterile by comparison. "This is the forest with all the animals," Maya explained, showing Alex a colorful drawing of trees populated with bears, deer, and birds. "And this is a special flower that only grows here. Daddy showed me. It's an endangered," Ben supplied from the kitchen. "It's a Kincaid's lupine. Only grows in a few spots in this forest." Alex recognized the name immediately. "Kincaid's lupine is a federally protected species," she said without thinking. "It's habitat for the Fender's blue butterfly, also endangered." Ben turned from the stove, giving her a curious look. "That's right. Not many hikers know specific endangered plant species." Alex realized her mistake. "I studied environmental science in college," she said, which was true enough. "I've always been interested in conservation issues." "The butterfly is this big," Maya said, holding her fingers a tiny distance apart, thankfully diverting attention. "And it's super blue. Daddy says if the trees get cut down, the flower will die, and then the butterfly will have nowhere to live." "That's exactly right," Alex said, her voice tight with emotion. This child understood the simple truth that Theodore and the Hartwell board refused to acknowledge, that everything in the ecosystem was connected, each loss cascading into further destruction. After dinner, Ben settled Maya into bed, while Alex remained on the couch, her injured ankle elevated on pillows. The domestic routine of bedtime stories and goodnight kisses floated through the small cabin, another glimpse into a life completely different from her own. When Ben returned to the main room, his expression had shifted from the gentle father to the more assessing ranger. "Maya's asleep," he said, taking a seat across from Alex. "Now I think it's time you told me what you were really doing in that section of forest with professional camera equipment and scientific collection tools." Alex weighed her options carefully. This man had saved her, brought her into his home, and treated her injury, but revealing her identity could put her entire plan at risk. And yet he was clearly passionate about protecting the very forest she was trying to save. "I was documenting evidence," she said finally. "Endangered species habitats, watershed features, old-growth stands, all the things that should legally prevent logging, but somehow don't appear in official reports." Ben leaned forward. "Are you with an environmental group, a journalist?" Alex looked down at her hands. "It's complicated. Let's just say I have access to information that could help stop the Cedar Falls logging project, but I needed photographic evidence to support it." "And the reason you can't be found here," Ben pressed. "There are powerful interests who would prevent this information from becoming public," she said carefully. "People who have significant financial stakes in the project proceeding as planned." Ben studied her for a long moment. "You're not telling me everything?" "No," Alex admitted. "I'm not." The honesty of her response seemed to satisfy him temporarily. "Your ankle needs at least a day of complete rest before you try walking the net. Whatever your mysterious mission is, it will have to wait." "I appreciate your help," Alex said sincerely. "And your discretion. I promise I'm not doing anything illegal. Quite the opposite." Ben nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "The guest room is through that door. Maya already put fresh towels in there for you." That night, as Alex lay in the unfamiliar bed, she reflected on the strange turn her plan had taken. Instead of gathering evidence and disappearing before Theodore's people could find her, she was injured and dependent on the hospitality of a forest ranger who was directly opposed to her family's company. The irony would be amusing if the stakes weren't so high. Through the thin walls, she could hear Ben moving around the cabin, checking locks and banking the fire for the night. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness she rarely encountered in her world of corporate maneuvering and political calculation. Despite her predicament, Alex realized she felt safer in this small cabin than she had in her luxury penthouse for months. Morning brought fresh challenges. Alex's ankle had stiffened overnight, making even the simplest movements painful. Ben had left for his ranger duties before dawn, leaving a note explaining that Maya would catch the school bus at the end of the driveway and that he'd return by mid-afternoon. He'd left pain relievers, ice packs, and simple breakfast foods within easy reach. Alex used the quiet hours to take stock of her situation. Her phone still showed no service, cutting her off from any news about the reaction to her absence from the signing ceremony. By now, Theodore would have launched a full search. Her only advantage was that no one knew where she had gone. Her research into Cedar Falls had been conducted through encrypted channels, specifically to prevent corporate IT from tracking her interests. She was examining the ranger station maps on Ben's desk when a folder caught her eye. Hartwell Environmental, Cedar Falls Project. Unable to resist, Alex opened it to find newspaper clippings, official correspondence, and handwritten notes documenting Ben's one-man campaign against her family's company. His research was impressively thorough, identifying many of the same environmental concerns she'd been raising internally for months. One document particularly caught her attention: a petition signed by local residents opposing the project with Ben's signature at the top. Next to it was a letter from Hartwell Environmental's legal department dismissing the community concerns with clinical, corporate language she recognized all too well. The contrast between the passionate, handwritten petition and the cold legal response made her stomach twist with shame. When Ben returned that afternoon, he found Alex sitting on the couch with his research spread around her. "Making yourself at home with my files?" he asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. "I'm sorry, Tal," Alex said, not entirely apologetic. "I was looking for maps and found your research on the Hartwell project. It's impressive." Ben hung his jacket by the door, his expression weary. "Impressive, but ineffective. I just came from a community meeting where Hartwell's representatives announced the project is proceeding ahead of schedule. Apparently some paperwork was signed this morning that fast-tracks the permitting process." Alex felt a chill. Theodore had found a way to proceed without her signature, perhaps using an electronic version she'd signed for a different purpose, or simply forging her authorization entirely. Her absence hadn't stopped the project. It had only removed the last internal obstacle. "When do they start cutting?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Preliminary road construction begins next week," Ben said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Full logging operations within 30 days. "That's faster than I expected," Alex admitted, her mind racing. Her original plan, gathering evidence, then using her position as CEO to halt the project while she worked with environmental groups to secure permanent protection, was now obsolete. She needed a new strategy, and quickly. Ben sat down across from her, studying her reaction with growing suspicion. "You seem awfully informed about corporate timelines for someone who was just hiking through the area." Before Alex could formulate a response, the cabin door burst open and Maya ran in her school backpack, bouncing against her small frame. "Daddy, Miss Johnson says we have to make an endangered species project, and I'm doing the butterfly," she announced, then stopped when she saw Alex. "You're still here. Is your ankle better? Can you help with my project? Daddy says you know about butterflies." The torrent of questions momentarily derailed the tension between the adults. Alex found herself smiling despite the complications of her situation. "I'd be happy to help with your butterfly project," she told Maya. "Homework first, then dinner, then project time," Ben directed gently. "Go wash up while I start cooking." As Maya disappeared into the bathroom, Ben turned back to Alex. "You're welcome to stay for dinner and another night if your ankle needs it. But tomorrow we need to get you to town for proper medical attention, and I need some honest answers about why you're really here." During dinner, Maya dominated the conversation with school stories and questions about butterflies. Alex found herself explaining the life cycle of the Fender's blue butterfly, with the enthusiasm she normally reserved for her secret environmental research, drawing diagrams on Maya's notebook and suggesting ways to create a model for her school project. "You're really good at explaining science stuff," Maya said admiringly. "Most grown-ups make it boring." "Maya," Ben interjected, "why don't you get your colored pencils so Alex can show you how to draw the butterfly's wing pattern correctly?" As Maya rushed to her room, Ben leaned closer to Alex. "You're not just someone with a casual college interest in environmental science," he said quietly. "The way you explain specialized Lepidoptera life cycles and habitat requirements, that's advanced ecological knowledge. Who are you really?" Before Alex could respond, Maya returned with her art supplies and a large book. "I found this in your backpack," she said innocently, placing a leather-bound journal on the table. "It has lots of science notes and pretty drawings." Alex felt her heart stop as Ben picked up the journal, her field research notebook filled with detailed ecological observations, policy analyses, and margin notes about Hartwell Environmental's legal vulnerabilities. And there on the inside cover in gold embossing was the name she had tried to hide. Alexandra Hartwell, Ph.D., Environmental Science, Oxford University. Ben's expression transformed as he read the name connecting the dots with devastating speed. He looked up at Alex, shock giving way to confusion, then anger. Alexandra Hartwell, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. As in Hartwell Environmental Corporation, the company planning to destroy this entire forest. Maya looked between them, sensing the sudden tension, but not understanding its cause. Daddy, what's wrong? Nothing, squirrel, Ben said, making a visible effort to control his reaction. It's just getting late. Why don't you go pick a bedtime story while I talk to our guest for a minute? Once Maya had reluctantly left the room, Ben turned back to Alex, betrayal evident in his eyes. You're not just connected to Hartwell Environmental. According to this, you're leading it. CEO Alexandra Hartwell in my cabin, looking through my research files, while your company prepares to clear-cut the forest I've spent my career protecting. Alex felt the fragile connection they'd built crumbling. It's not what you think, she began. Really, Ben's voice was tight with controlled anger. Because what I think is that the heir to an environmental destruction empire somehow ended up in my home gaining access to all my opposition research while pretending to be just a hiker with an interest in conservation. I wasn't pretending about that part, Alex insisted. I have a doctorate in environmental science. I've been fighting the Cedar Falls project from inside the company for months. Ben's laugh was harsh and disbelieving, fighting it so effectively that it's now proceeding ahead of schedule. If you're the CEO, you could stop it with a single word. It's not that simple, Alex said, frustration coloring her voice. My grandfather Theodore controls the board. I was trying to gather independent evidence to force a legal review before the permits were finalized. And I'm supposed to believe that the head of Hartwell Environmental is secretly an environmental crusader. Ben shook his head. Next you'll tell me you fell into that ravine accidentally, not while scouting the best old-growth stands to harvest first. The accusation stung especially because Ben had no way of knowing how close to the truth he was, albeit in the opposite direction. Alex had indeed been scouting the forest, but to save it, not to plan its destruction. I was supposed to sign the final authorization yesterday, she said quietly. Instead, I disappeared. I came here to document what would be lost. The species habitats, the watershed features, everything your research has been tracking. I was going to use my position to protect this place, not destroy it. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Ben's face as if he wanted to believe her. Then his expression hardened again. Even if that's true, you've been lying to me and my daughter for 2 days, accepting our help while hiding who you really are. Would you have helped me if you'd known? Alex challenged. Ben didn't answer directly. You should leave tomorrow. Once your ankle can bear weight, I'll drive you to town. What you do after that is your business, but I want you out of my home. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Alex nodded slowly, the weight of her identity once again becoming a barrier between herself and authentic connection. I understand. That night, lying awake in the guest room, Alex could hear Ben pacing in the main room of the cabin. She'd revealed too much, yet somehow not enough to make him understand her position. Tomorrow she would leave her mission unfinished, her only allies lost through her own deception. What she couldn't know was that Ben was sitting at his desk reading through her research journal with growing amazement. The detailed observations, the policy analyses, the clear passion for conservation that filled every page. They told a story very different from the corporate narrative he'd assumed. As dawn approached, Ben Torres found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about Alexandra Hartwell and her true intentions in his forest. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows as Alex hobbled to the kitchen table, her ankle still swollen, but slightly improved after a night's rest. She found Ben already awake, dressed in his ranger uniform, studying her research journal with intense concentration. When he looked up, his expression was guarded but less hostile than the previous night. Your notes on the watershed contamination risks are more comprehensive than anything our local environmental assessment managed to document. He said, his tone neutral, but with a hint of reluctant admiration. Alex approached cautiously, uncertain of where they stood after last night's revelation. I've been tracking Theodore's selective editing of environmental impact reports for months, she explained. The official documents omit roughly 60% of the ecological risks. Ben closed the journal and pushed it across the table toward her. Why should I believe anything you say? The Hartwell name isn't exactly synonymous with environmental integrity. Alex sat down, wincing slightly as she adjusted her position. I understand your skepticism. If I were in your position, I'd feel the same way. She took a deep breath. But I'm not my grandfather. I never wanted to run Hartwell Environmental. It was forced on me after my mother died. Oh, your mother? Ben asked, curiosity briefly overriding his suspicion. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell. Alex said, a flash of pain crossing her features. Brilliant environmental scientist. Married my father thinking she could change the company from within. When that failed, she focused on raising me with different values, teaching me about conservation, while Theodore was teaching me about profit margins. Something in her tone, the raw honesty behind the words, made Ben pause. He studied her face, looking for deception, but finding only a complicated grief that seemed genuine. That still doesn't explain why the CEO of Hartwell Environmental is sabotaging her own company's project, he said finally. Alex met his gaze directly. 3 years ago, my mother died of a rare form of cancer. Before she died, she made me promise to fix what the family business had broken. She believed, and research later confirmed, that her illness was linked to chemical exposure from one of our company's older manufacturing facilities. She continued, her voice steady despite the painful memories. I took the CEO position with a plan to gradually transition the company toward sustainable practices. But Theodore controls the board, and any attempt at environmental reform has been systematically blocked. The Cedar Falls project was my breaking point. I couldn't put my name on the destruction of one more ecosystem. Ben remained silent, processing her words. The story aligned with the passion evident in her research journal, but trusting the heir to Hartwell Environmental went against everything he'd experienced in his years fighting corporate logging interests. Maya will be up soon, he said finally. We should have this conversation later. As if on cue, Maya appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching a stuffed bear. Is Alex leaving today? She asked, her voice small and disappointed. Ben and Alex exchanged a look, an unspoken negotiation passing between them. After a moment, Ben turned to his daughter. Alex's ankle needs more time to heal, he said carefully. She'll be staying with us a little longer. Maya's face brightened immediately. Can she help me with my butterfly project for school and maybe teach me more science stuff? If she feels up to it, Ben replied, shooting Alex a warning glance that clearly said their conversation wasn't over. After breakfast and seeing Maya off to school, Ben surprised Alex by not immediately returning to their confrontation. Instead, he brought out a topographical map of Cedar Falls Forest and spread it across the table. If what you're saying is true, he began, his tone making it clear he wasn't entirely convinced, then you need to understand exactly what's at stake. This isn't just about trees. For the next hour, Ben walked Alex through the complex ecosystem of Cedar Falls, the interconnected watersheds that supply drinking water to 3 counties, the wildlife corridors essential for species migration, the sacred sites of the local indigenous tribe that had never been properly documented in official surveys. His knowledge was intimate and passionate, born from years of daily interaction with the land. This ridge system, he explained, pointing to an area on the map, creates a natural fire break that protects the town during wildfire season. The Hartwell logging plan would eliminate it entirely. They never included that in any of the internal assessments, Alex said, making notes in her journal. The fire risk analysis only covered potential damage to timber resources, not community safety. Ben's eyebrows rose slightly. You really have been fighting this from the inside, haven't you? Trying to, Alex admitted. But Theodore has decades of experience manipulating corporate governance. Every objection I raise gets buried in committee reviews or dismissed as requiring further study. Meanwhile, the bulldozers get closer. Ben studied her for a long moment. What exactly was your plan when you came out here before the fall? Alex explained her original strategy, documenting evidence that Theodore's environmental reports had deliberately omitted, then using her position as CEO to temporarily halt the project while pursuing legal protection for the forest through environmental advocacy groups. And now, Ben asked, Theodore has clearly found a way to proceed without your signature. Alex's expression darkened. He's almost certainly used my electronic signature from other documents or simply forged my authorization. It's illegal, but by the time that could be proven in court, the forest would be gone. So what's your next move? I need to contact my private attorney, Alex said. He's been preparing documentation for exactly this scenario. But I can't do it from here. There's no cell service and I can't risk using your landline or internet connection. Theodore's security team will be monitoring all communication channels associated with known Forest Service personnel. Ben absorbed this information with a frown. You think they're watching me specifically? You're the most vocal opponent of the Cedar Falls project, Alex pointed out. Of course they are. The realization seemed to settle over Ben, bringing with it a new understanding of what he was potentially involving himself in by helping her. After a moment, he came to a decision. I need to go to my shift at the ranger station, he said, but I'll be back early afternoon. If what you're saying is true, we need a better plan than you hiding out here until your ankle heals. After Ben left, Alex spent the morning reviewing his research materials and comparing them with her own notes. The isolation of the cabin, free from the constant pressure of corporate responsibilities, and Theodore's surveillance allowed her to think more clearly than she had in months. By the time she heard Ben's truck returning several hours later, she had formulated the outline of a new strategy. Ben entered carrying a small duffel bag and wearing an expression that mixed resolution with lingering doubt. I stopped by the pharmacy in town, he said, placing the bag on the table. Proper ankle brace, anti-inflammatory medication, and crutches. If you're going to be mobile before that sprain heals, you'll need these. The gesture, practical but unexpectedly thoughtful, caught Alex off guard. Thank you, she said simply. Ben nodded, then proceeded to tell her what he'd learned in town. Hartwell Environmental had issued a press release announcing that CEO Alexandra Hartwell was taking a brief sabbatical for health reasons, with Theodore Hartwell temporarily resuming executive functions. Meanwhile, preparations for the Cedar Falls logging operation were proceeding rapidly, with equipment already being transported to staging areas. They're moving faster than normal protocols would allow, Ben concluded, almost as if they're rushing to create facts on the ground before anyone can intervene. That's exactly what Theodore is doing, Alex confirmed. He knows that once cutting begins, legal challenges become much harder to pursue. The courts tend to favor existing operations over speculative environmental concerns. Ben paced the small cabin processing this information. So we're looking at weeks, not months, before irreversible damage begins. The word "we" hung in the air between them, a subtle but significant shift in Ben's positioning. Alex noted it but didn't comment directly. I have a proposal, she said instead. A way forward that might benefit both of us. Ben turned to face her, arms crossed but expression open. I'm listening. I need somewhere to stay while my ankle heals, and I develop a new strategy, Alex began. Somewhere Theodore's people won't think to look for me. In return, I can provide you with insider information about Hartwell Environmental's vulnerabilities, legal, regulatory, and public relations. The kind of information that could significantly strengthen local opposition to the project. You want to stay here, Ben clarified, in my cabin. It's the last place they'd look for me, Alex pointed out. And I can help around the house teach Maya about environmental science. She clearly has an aptitude for it. I noticed you were working on an appeal to the State Forestry Commission. I could help strengthen that significantly with insider knowledge of how Theodore manipulates the approval process. Ben considered her offer, his expression thoughtful. And what happens when your ankle heals? You just disappear back to your corporate life. The question held more layers than its surface simplicity suggested. Alex recognized the underlying concern, that she might be using Ben in this situation for temporary advantage, with no real commitment to the forest or the community it sustained. I'm not going back, she said firmly. Not to Hartwell Environmental, not to the life Theodore planned for me. Whatever happens with Cedar Falls, I'm done being part of the problem. Those are easy words to say when you're hiding in a forest cabin, Ben observed. Harder to maintain when you're facing the reality of walking away from billions in inheritance and corporate power. His skepticism was reasonable, Alex had to admit. She had no way to prove the sincerity of her intentions except through actions over time. Time they might not have before the forest faced irreversible damage. You don't have to trust my motives, she said finally. Just my information. If what I provide helps protect Cedar Falls, does it matter why I'm giving it to you? Ben was silent for a long moment, weighing practical advantage against his ingrained distrust of corporate interest. Finally, he nodded. All right, you can stay until your ankle heals and we'll share information, but I have conditions. Name them, Alex said. Complete honesty from this point forward, Ben stated. No more hidden agendas or selective truths. Maya already likes you, and I won't have her getting attached to someone operating under false pretenses. Agreed, Alex nodded. You'll need to contribute to the household while you're here, Ben continued. I'm not running a hotel, and with my ranger salary, every meal counts. Of course, Alex said, though I should warn you my practical skills are limited. The admission came with a self-deprecating smile that momentarily lightened the tension between them. And finally, Ben said, his expression turning serious again, if at any point I believe you're using this situation to benefit Hartwell Environmental or undermine the forest protection efforts, our arrangement ends immediately. Alex met his gaze directly. Those terms are fair. I accept them all. They sealed the agreement with a handshake that felt oddly formal in the rustic setting of the cabin. As their hands met, Alex was struck by the contrast. Ben's calloused palm against her smoother, one physical evidence of their different worlds. Yet in this moment, they were aligned toward a common goal. The alliance began awkwardly, but quickly developed a functional rhythm. Alex's ankle improved enough for her to move around the cabin with crutches, allowing her to contribute to household tasks while Ben was at work. Her first attempts at practical chores were almost comically inept, burning toast, shrinking laundry, and nearly flooding the bathroom. But she approached each failure with determined humility rather than frustration. How is it possible you've never operated a washing machine? Ben asked one evening, rescuing a load of clothes from her overzealous application of detergent. Alex laughed, genuinely amused by her own incompetence. Boarding school from age 8, then college dormitories with service staff, then a penthouse with housekeeping service. The Hartwell heir wasn't exactly raised to be self-sufficient. The candid acknowledgement of her privileged background, delivered without defensiveness, made it harder for Ben to maintain his initial impression of her as merely another entitled corporate executive. He found himself explaining basic household tasks with the same patient detail he used when teaching Maya new skills, and Alex proved to be a quick study despite her lack of practical experience. Maya, for her part, was delighted by Alex's continued presence. Each afternoon when she returned from school, she would burst into the cabin with new questions about butterflies, forests, or whatever environmental topic had captured her imagination that day. Alex never simplified her explanations or used childish terminology, instead treating Maya's curiosity with the same intellectual respect she would give a graduate student. This approach thrilled Maya and grudgingly impressed Ben. The temperature increase affects butterfly emergence timing. Alex explained one afternoon, helping Maya create a detailed life cycle chart for her school project. If they emerge before their food plants are flowering, the whole population can collapse. Like if I woke up for breakfast, but all the food stores were closed, Maya asked, demonstrating her grasp of the concept. Exactly like that, Alex confirmed. It's called phenological mismatch, and it's one of the biggest threats to insect populations as climate patterns shift. Ben, observing from the kitchen where he was preparing dinner, noted the natural teaching ability Alex displayed, a talent at odds with the corporate shark image he'd initially projected onto her. He was beginning to understand that Alexandra Hartwell contained more contradictions than he had first assumed. Their professional collaboration proved equally productive. Each evening after Maya went to bed, they would spread maps and documents across the kitchen table, combining Ben's practical knowledge of the forest with Alex's insider understanding of corporate tactics. Theodore always follows the same pattern, Alex explained, annotating a timeline of previous Hartwell operations. He accelerates permitting by submitting multiple applications through different subsidiary companies, then consolidates them once approval is secured. It creates the impression of diverse economic interests rather than a single corporate land grab. That explains why we've been seeing permit applications from 3 different companies, Ben realized. We've been fighting them as separate entities when they're all Hartwell fronts. Exactly, Alex confirmed, and he'll have already prepared counters for the most obvious legal challenges. We need to approach this from an unexpected angle. Together, they began developing a comprehensive strategy to challenge the Cedar Falls project focusing on indigenous land rights watershed protection regulations and endangered species habitats, areas where Theodore's usual defenses might be weakest. The work was detailed and technical, but they found an unexpected rhythm in their collaboration, each contributing specialized knowledge the other lacked. As days passed, the initial tension between them gradually transformed into something closer to mutual respect. Ben observed Alex's genuine passion for environmental protection and her detailed knowledge of ecological systems, while Alex came to appreciate Ben's practical wisdom and unwavering commitment to the forest he protected. On the fifth day of their arrangement, Ben returned from his shift with troubling news. Hartwell security personnel had been seen in town asking questions about unusual visitors or hikers in the area. "They're looking for you," Ben said, keeping his voice low so Maya wouldn't overhear from where she was working on homework. "Not openly. They're claiming it's about trespassing concerns related to the upcoming project, but the description they're circulating matches you." Alex's expression tightened with concern. "They're moving faster than I expected. Theodore must be worried about what I might do." "How would they even know to look here?" Ben asked. "Cedar Falls is hours from Portland." "My research into this area," Alex explained. "I tried to keep it encrypted and separate from company systems, but Theodore has resources I can't match. He might have traced my interest in Cedar Falls and made the connection." The realization hung between them. Alex's presence potentially put Ben and Maya at risk. The unspoken question of whether she should leave was answered when Maya bounded over from the table, proudly displaying her completed butterfly project. "Look, I got all the life cycle stages right, and Miss Johnson says I can present it to the whole class tomorrow," she announced, beaming with pride. "Alex helped me get the wing patterns exactly right." "It's beautiful, squirrel," Ben said, his eyes meeting Alex's over his daughter's head. In that shared glance was a complex communication, acknowledgement of the risk, but also recognition that Maya had already formed an attachment that couldn't be casually severed. That night, after Maya was asleep, they discussed the situation more openly. "If they track me to your cabin, you could face serious consequences," Alex said. "Theodore wouldn't hesitate to fabricate trespassing or interference charges against a forest ranger opposing his project." "I'm not exactly new to corporate intimidation tactics," Ben replied with a grim smile. "But Maya's safety has to be my priority." "I should leave," Alex concluded reluctantly. "Find somewhere else to continue our work." Ben was quiet for a moment, weighing options. "Not yet," he decided finally. "They're still just asking general questions in town. No one there knows you're staying here. We have some time to develop our strategy before we need to change locations." The decision made, they returned to their work with renewed urgency, aware that their window of opportunity might be closing. As they studied maps and legal documents late into the night, the proximity created by the small cabin and shared purpose began to shift the dynamic between them in subtle ways. A lingering glance, fingers briefly touching while reaching for the same document, the unconscious leaning toward each other as they spoke. Neither acknowledged this emerging undercurrent, focusing instead on the practical challenges before them. But something had changed in their alliance, adding a dimension neither had anticipated. The next morning brought another development. While scanning news updates on Ben's laptop, Alex discovered that Theodore had scheduled a press conference regarding the Cedar Falls project with groundbreaking ceremonies planned for the following week, far earlier than their original timeline had suggested. "He's accelerating everything," Alex said, scrolling through the announcement, "bringing in political supporters, media coverage, creating a public spectacle that will make intervention more difficult." Ben read over her shoulder, his presence warm behind her chair. "Can your legal contacts still file an injunction with this compressed timeline?" "Possibly, but we'd need to get them the documentation immediately," Alex replied. "And I still can't risk electronic communication from here." The problem occupied them throughout the day, creating a tension that Maya picked up on despite their efforts to maintain normalcy around her. That evening, as Ben helped his daughter with her reading assignment, Alex sat on the porch watching the sunset through the trees and weighing potential solutions against increasing risks. She was still there when Ben joined her after putting Maya to bed, 2 mugs of tea in hand. He offered one to Alex, then sat in the adjacent chair, his gaze following hers to the darkening forest. "Maya asked if you were sad," he said after a comfortable silence. "She's perceptive." Alex smiled faintly. "She's remarkable. You've done an amazing job raising her, especially on your own. She hesitated on the last words, aware they approached personal territory they had mostly avoided. Ben nodded in acknowledgement. It hasn't been easy. Anna was always better with the emotional stuff, the celebrations and comfort. I'm still figuring it out day by day. The mention of his late wife opened a door that had remained closed during their professional collaboration. Alex sensed the significance, but approached carefully. Maya mentioned your wife was sick. I'm sorry for your loss. Ben was quiet for a long moment, the forest sounds filling the space between them. Cancer, he said finally. Aggressive type, diagnosed late because we couldn't afford regular checkups on a ranger's salary. By the time we knew, it had already spread. The pain in his voice resonated with Alex's own grief over her mother. That's how I lost my mother too, she said softly. Different circumstances, but the same helplessness, watching someone slip away. Ben turned to look at her, really seeing her in that moment, not as the Hartwell heir, or even as his unexpected ally, but simply as someone who understood a specific kind of loss. How long ago? 3 years next month, Alex replied. She fought for almost 2 years before the end. The best treatments money could buy, and none of it mattered in the end. Anna had 8 months from diagnosis to the end, Ben said. The doctors recommended an experimental treatment, but our insurance wouldn't cover it, and the out-of-pocket cost was more than I'd make in 5 years. The brutal economics of his situation struck Alex with particular force, highlighting the vast inequality between their experiences. Her mother had received every possible medical intervention, while Ben's wife had been denied treatment because of financial constraints. That's why this forest matters so much to you, Alex realized aloud. It's not just professional commitment. Ben nodded, his gaze returning to the darkening trees. Anna loved this place. We built the cabin together, planned to grow old here. After she died, I promised Maya we wouldn't lose our home too. But with Hartwell's project threatening the entire ecosystem and property values already dropping in anticipation of the logging operation, he trailed off. The financial precarity of his situation implied rather than stated. Alex felt a surge of shame at her family company's role in threatening not just the forest ecosystem, but this man's home and livelihood, the last connection he and Maya had to the wife and mother they'd lost. The abstract community impacts mentioned in corporate reports suddenly had a very specific human face. I didn't know, she said inadequately. The community impact assessments never capture the real human costs. They're not designed to, Ben replied without bitterness, simply stating a fact. That's why fighting companies like Hartwell always feels like shouting into the void. The people making decisions never have to look in the eyes of the people affected by those decisions. His words hung in the night air, unintentionally indicting Alex as part of the very system she was now trying to fight. The uncomfortable truth was that until her disappearance, she had been one of those decision makers, however reluctantly. I can't undo what Hartwell Environmental has already done, Alex said after a long moment. But I can try to stop this project and maybe start making amends for the damage my family has caused. Ben studied her in the fading light, reassessing her once again. You really mean that, don't you? Yes, Alex said simply. I do. Something shifted between them in that quiet exchange, a new understanding that transcended their tactical alliance. For the first time, Ben saw Alex not as a corporate refugee with useful information, but as someone genuinely seeking redemption for harms she hadn't personally committed, but felt responsible for nonetheless. The conversation might have deepened further, but was interrupted by Ben's phone ringing. Unusual for this time of evening, he answered with a frown that quickly transformed into concern. When so? He asked, rising from his chair and moving toward the door. Yes, I can be there in 20 minutes. Has anyone notified her parents? Another pause. I understand. I'm on my way. He ended the call and turned to Alex, tension evident in his posture. Maya's friend Lily has gone missing in the forest. She was playing near Cedar Creek after school and didn't come home. Search parties are forming now. Go, Alex said immediately. I'll be fine here. Ben hesitated, clearly torn between his responsibilities. I can't leave you alone. If Hartwell Security is in the area, Maya's friend is missing in the forest at night, Alex interrupted firmly. That takes priority over everything else. I'll lock the doors and stay out of sight. Go. After another moment's hesitation, Ben nodded. I'll call if we're going to be out past midnight. Keep your ankle elevated and "I'll be fine," Alex repeated, already helping him gather his emergency gear. "Find that little girl." Once Ben had left, Alex secured the cabin and returned to their work, trying to focus on legal strategies rather than worry about the search operation. The hours passed slowly, punctuated by her checking the time and listening for Ben's truck. Shortly after 11 p.m., her concern grew when heavy rain began falling, complicating the search conditions. She was debating whether to try calling Ben's cell when a sharp knock at the door startled her. Grabbing her crutches, Alex moved cautiously to the window, peering out to see a Park Service vehicle in the driveway. Relief washed over her. Ben must have sent a colleague to check on her or deliver a message. When she opened the door, however, she found not a forest ranger, but two men in dark clothing, their postures radiating professional menace despite their neutral expressions. "Ms. Hartwell," the taller one said without preamble, "your grandfather sent us to bring you home safely." Alex's blood ran cold as she recognized the head of Theodore's private security team, the same man who had escorted other family members who had challenged Theodore's authority in the past. Behind him, she could see the Park Service logo on the vehicle was a magnetic decal hastily applied to an unmarked SUV. "How did you find me?" she asked, stalling while her mind raced through options. "Your grandfather sounded concerned when you missed the signing ceremony," the man replied with practiced smoothness. "Given your previous research interests, Cedar Falls seemed a logical place to look. A local reported seeing someone matching your description with Ranger Torres." Alex realized with sick certainty that the missing child report had been a ruse to separate her from Ben. Theodore's tactics had always been ruthlessly efficient, creating a fake emergency that would guarantee Ben's absence while they retrieved her. "I need to leave a note," she said, trying to project calm while frantically considering escape routes limited by her injured ankle. "That won't be necessary," the security man said, stepping forward. Mr. Hartwell was quite clear that time is of the essence. Alex gripped her crutches tighter, knowing she couldn't outrun or overpower these men. "At least let me gather my things." "Your grandfather has replaced anything you might need," came the implacable response. "Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Miss Hartwell." The implicit threat hung in the air. These men wouldn't physically harm her. Theodore would never risk his heir. But they had no such restrictions regarding Ben if he returned and interfered. Alex thought of Maya already having lost her mother, potentially facing her father's arrest, or worse, if Theodore decided Ben knew too much. "Very well," she conceded, seeing no immediate alternative that wouldn't endanger Ben and Maya. "I'll come with you." The men escorted her to the SUV, one taking her crutches while the other supported her weight with a grip that appeared helpful, but was firmly controlling. As they drove away from the cabin, Alex stared back at the small home that had briefly represented a different kind of life. Simpler but somehow more authentic than anything she'd experienced in the corporate world. She had no illusions about what awaited her in Portland. Theodore wouldn't physically restrain her, but he had other methods of control: financial leverage, legal threats, and the emotional manipulation he'd perfected over decades. He would demand her public support for the Cedar Falls project, using her brief disappearance as leverage. The realization that she'd failed to protect the forest, failed to honor her mother's last wish, failed Ben and Maya, who had trusted her despite every reason not to, settled over Alex with crushing weight. She had weeks of insider information about Hartwell operations, but had never managed to get it to the environmental attorneys who could use it effectively. Then as the SUV navigated the dark forest roads, Alex noticed something that gave her pause. The security men had taken her crutches and backpack, but in their efficiency, they'd overlooked something critical. She was still wearing Ben's jacket, which he had lent her earlier that evening when she'd been sitting on the porch. And in the inside pocket was the USB drive containing all their compiled research on the Cedar Falls project, including her insider information about Hartwell's legal vulnerabilities. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small piece of resistance she could still maintain even as Theodore brought her back into the corporate fold. Now she just needed to find a way to get the information to someone who could use it before the forest fell to Hartwell's bulldozers. Meanwhile, across the forest, Ben Torres was becoming increasingly suspicious about the search operation. He'd arrived at the designated meeting point to find confused volunteers but no coherent search plan. The missing child report had apparently come through an anonymous call to the ranger station with details that seemed increasingly questionable as Ben investigated. A call to Lily's parents confirmed his growing concern. Their daughter was safely at home, had never been playing near Cedar Creek, and they knew nothing about any search operation. The realization hit Ben with stunning force. The entire emergency had been fabricated to draw him away from the cabin. From Alex. He raced back through the rainy night, pushing his truck to dangerous speeds on the slick forest roads, a sense of dread building with each passing mile. When he arrived at the cabin, his worst fears were confirmed. The door stood ajar, lights still on, but Alex was gone. The only signs of struggle were muddy boot prints on the porch and a single crutch that had fallen beside the door. Alex, he called, knowing already there would be no answer. He moved through the small cabin, looking for any clue about what had happened or where they might have taken her. On the kitchen table, their work remained spread out. Maps, legal documents, strategy notes. But Alex's journal was missing along with her personal belongings. Ben sank into a chair, the reality of the situation washing over him. Theodore Hartwell had found his granddaughter and reclaimed her, using Ben's protective instincts against him with cruel efficiency. The missing child ruse had been designed specifically for him. What ranger could ignore such an emergency, proving that Theodore's surveillance was more thorough than either of them had realized? The question now was what Theodore would do with Alex and what her removal meant for their efforts to protect Cedar Falls. Would she be coerced into supporting the project publicly? Would Theodore use her brief alliance with Ben as leverage to control her? Or would she find a way to maintain her resistance even under her grandfather's watchful eye? Ben was still processing these questions when he noticed something on the floor near the door, a small, folded piece of paper that must have fallen during Alex's hasty removal. He picked it up and unfolded it to find a hastily scrawled note. "They came. Not your fault. USB in jacket pocket has everything. Don't trust any Hartwell communication going forward. Protect Maya. A." The note confirmed Ben's fears, but also revealed Alex's presence of mind even in crisis. She'd managed to leave crucial information behind, maintaining their chance to fight the Cedar Falls project. The reference to the jacket confused him momentarily until he remembered lending Alex his spare coat that evening. The jacket was gone. She must have been wearing it when they took her, which meant the USB drive was still with her. Ben rubbed his temples, trying to think clearly through his growing concern for Alex's safety. Theodore Hartwell wasn't known for violence, but his corporate tactics were ruthlessly effective. Alex was now back in the lion's den, potentially facing enormous pressure to denounce everything she'd been fighting for. As Ben contemplated next steps, his phone rang. Maya's babysitter calling to check when he'd be home. The reminder of his daughter brought Ben's priorities into sharp focus. He needed to protect Maya first, then figure out how to continue the fight for Cedar Falls, and hopefully find a way to help Alex if she needed it. When he explained the situation to the babysitter, a simplified version about a work emergency requiring him to stay out longer, she offered to keep Maya overnight at her house. Ben gratefully accepted, knowing his daughter would be safer away from the cabin tonight. If Theodore's people had found Alex here, they might return, looking for the information she'd been gathering. Alone in the suddenly empty cabin, Ben gathered the most crucial documents from their research, securing them in his emergency go-bag. The rain continued to pound against the roof as he worked, mirroring his troubled thoughts. In less than a week, Alexandra Hartwell had transformed from an abstract corporate enemy to an ally, and now something more complicated. The concern he felt for her safety went beyond their strategic partnership, touching something more personal that he wasn't entirely ready to examine. Ben checked his watch, nearly 1 a.m. Too late to take any meaningful action tonight, but early tomorrow he would need to make difficult decisions. Should he try to contact Alex directly? Alert environmental groups about the accelerated logging timeline. Relocate Maya somewhere safer until the situation stabilized. As he finally lay down for a few hours of restless sleep, Ben's last thoughts were of Alex being driven away in the night, back to the corporate world she had tried to escape. He hoped she would find a way to maintain her integrity against Theodore's pressure, and that the information they'd compiled would somehow find its way to those who could use it effectively. What neither Ben nor Alex could know was that their brief alliance had already set in motion events that would prove more consequential than either had anticipated. Theodore Hartwell, in his determination to reclaim his granddaughter and secure the Cedar Falls project, had inadvertently created exactly the conditions needed for Alex to make her most dramatic stand yet, one that would test her resolve, Ben's trust, and the future of Cedar Falls itself. In Portland, as the SUV approached the gleaming Hartwell corporate headquarters, Alex touched the USB drive hidden in Ben's jacket pocket and made a silent promise to the forest, to Ben and Maya, and to herself, that this was not the end of her resistance, but merely the beginning of a new phase. Theodore had recaptured her body, but her determination remained free and fiercer than ever. The Hartwell building dominated Portland's skyline, 70 stories of glass and steel, reflecting the morning light. Alex stared up at it from the back seat of the company car, feeling like a prisoner returning to a familiar cell. 3 days had passed since Theodore's security team had taken her from Ben's cabin. 3 days of corporate confinement disguised as concern for her well-being. "Ms. Hartwell, your 9 a.m. meeting with the board has been confirmed," her assistant said, not looking up from her tablet, as they rode the executive elevator to the top floor. Mr. Hartwell emphasized punctuality. Alex nodded, her expression carefully neutral. She had spent these days playing a delicate role, the repentant granddaughter supposedly chastened after her stress-induced retreat to the wilderness. Theodore had presented her disappearance to the board as a health issue, a temporary breakdown that required rest and supervision. The story had been accepted without question, just as he'd known it would be. "And the press conference regarding Cedar Falls," Alex asked, keeping her tone professionally detached. "Scheduled for tomorrow. Your speech has been prepared." The assistant handed her a folder containing carefully crafted talking points supporting the accelerated logging timeline. The elevator doors opened to reveal the executive floor, a world of hushed conversations and expensive artwork that had once been the center of Alex's existence. Now it felt like an elaborate stage set, artificial and constraining after the honest simplicity of Ben's cabin. Theodore was waiting in the boardroom, surrounded by his usual circle of executives. At 82, he still projected formidable authority, his posture straight, his gaze sharp as he watched Alex enter. The brief nod he offered contained both acknowledgement and warning. "Play your part or face consequences." "Alexandra," he greeted with practiced warmth, "the board is pleased to see you recovered from your retreat." Alex took her seat at the table, acutely aware of the USB drive still hidden in the inner pocket of her blazer. She had transferred it from Ben's jacket immediately upon arriving in Portland, knowing it represented her only leverage against Theodore's plans. So far, her grandfather's surveillance had focused on her electronic communications and movements, not physically searching her person. "Thank you for your concern," she replied with equal insincerity. "I'm eager to resume my responsibilities." The meeting proceeded with mind-numbing corporate ritual, quarterly projections, market analysis, strategic planning, while the fate of Cedar Falls hung unspoken in the air between Alex and Theodore. Only when the other board members had departed did her grandfather address the real issue. "Well, your little adventure was ill-timed and poorly conceived," Theodore said, his voice now stripped of its public pleasantries. "Did you imagine you could simply disappear and halt a project of this magnitude?" Alex met his gaze without flinching. "I needed time to reconsider my position on Cedar Falls. The environmental concerns have been addressed according to all legal requirements," Theodore cut in. "Your personal feelings about trees are irrelevant to this company's obligations to its shareholders." "Our obligations extend beyond shareholders," Alex countered, maintaining the argument she had been making for months. "Environmental sustainability, community impact." Theodore dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. "Your mother filled your head with these impractical ideals. The world runs on pragmatism and profit, Alexandra. The sooner you accept that reality, the sooner you can fulfill your proper role in this company." The mention of her mother stiffened Alex's resolve. "And what exactly is my proper role, figurehead, CEO, public relations puppet?" "Your role," Theodore said with dangerous softness, "is to continue the Hartwell legacy that 4 generations have built, a legacy currently threatened by your sentimental attachment to a forest ranger and his daughter." The direct reference to Ben and Maya sent a chill through Alex. Theodore's intelligence was clearly more detailed than she had feared. "They have nothing to do with this," she said carefully. Theodore's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then you won't object to reading the statement our PR team has prepared for tomorrow's press conference. A full endorsement of the Cedar Falls project, highlighting the economic benefits and dismissing the exaggerated environmental concerns." He slid a document across the table, a comprehensive repudiation of everything Alex believed, everything she and Ben had been fighting for. Signing it would betray not just her principles, but the trust Ben had placed in her. And if I refuse, she asked, though she already anticipated the answer, then perhaps the authorities should investigate Ranger Torres for his role in detaining a corporate executive against her will. Theodore replied, I understand kidnapping charges could affect his custody of the child. Maya isn't it? The threat hung in the air between them, monstrous in its calculated cruelty. Theodore had identified her greatest vulnerability, not her own safety or position, but the welfare of Ben and Maya, who had shown her kindness when they had every reason not to. You would destroy an innocent family to get your way, Alex said the words a statement rather than a question. I would remove obstacles to this company's progress, Theodore corrected, as I have always done. Alex took the document, her mind racing for alternatives. I'll review this before tomorrow. See that you do. Theodore rose, signaling the end of their conversation. And Alexandra, don't mistake my patience for weakness. The Cedar Falls project will proceed with or without your cooperation. The only variable is how much collateral damage occurs in the process. After he left, Alex remained seated, the threat against Ben and Maya weighing heavily against her responsibility to protect Cedar Falls. The company resources at Theodore's disposal were vast. Legal teams, private security, media connections, political influence. Fighting him openly would trigger immediate retaliation against the Torres family. She needed a different approach, one that would require patience, subtlety, and perfect timing. Miles away in Cedar Falls, Ben Torres was facing his own dilemma. 4 days had passed since Alex had been taken with no communication beyond a corporate press release announcing her return from a brief wellness retreat. The carefully worded statement hinted at health issues requiring rest and mentioned her continued support for company initiatives, including Cedar Falls. Ben read between the lines, recognizing Theodore's hand in the carefully crafted narrative. The question was whether Alex had genuinely returned to the corporate fold or was being coerced into compliance. Without direct contact, he couldn't know for certain. Daddy, when is Alex coming back? Maya asked over breakfast, the question becoming a daily ritual since Alex's disappearance. Ben set down his coffee, choosing his words carefully. Alex had to return to her work in the City Squirrel. Remember how we talked about her having an important role? But she promised to help with my science fair project, Maya persisted, and she left her books here. The small stack of environmental texts Alex had been using remained on the side table, one of the few tangible reminders of her presence in their home. Ben had considered contacting her at Hartwell headquarters, but had ultimately decided against it, unsure whether such communication might put her at greater risk. I know, and I'm sure she wanted to keep that promise, Ben said gently. Sometimes grown-up responsibilities can be complicated. Maya considered this with the solemn evaluation only children can manage. I think her grandpa is mean, she declared finally. Alex looked scared when she talked about him. The observation startlingly perceptive from a 6-year-old aligned with Ben's own concerns. During their late-night strategy sessions, Alex had occasionally mentioned Theodore's methods of control, financial leverage, emotional manipulation, implicit threats. Ben had sensed there was more. She wasn't sharing darker aspects of the family dynamic she kept private. We need to respect Alex's choices, Ben said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Had she chosen to leave or been given no choice, the uncertainty gnawed at him as he prepared for his shift at the ranger station. The station was unusually busy that morning. News of the accelerated Cedar Falls project had spread through the community, bringing concerned citizens seeking information about the timeline and potential for legal challenges. Ben provided what guidance he could, but without Alex's insider knowledge, their options seemed increasingly limited. Torres, you've got a visitor, his supervisor called across the crowded office. Conference room B. Expecting another concerned local resident, Ben was surprised to find a well-dressed woman in her 50s waiting for him, her professional demeanor suggesting corporate or legal background. Ranger Torres, I'm Margaret Chen's senior counsel with Breakwater Environmental Law Center. She introduced herself, offering a business card that confirmed her credentials. I understand you may have information regarding the Hartwell Environmental Corporation's Cedar Falls project. Ben studied her cautiously. What kind of information are you looking for? Evidence of environmental impact report, falsification, endangered species, habitat destruction, watershed contamination risks. Anything that might support an emergency injunction filing, she replied directly. My organization has been monitoring Hartwell's activities for years, but the accelerated timeline for Cedar Falls has created unexpected urgency. And why approach me specifically? Ben asked, still wary of potential traps after Theodore's deception with the false missing child report. Margaret Chen's expression softened slightly. A mutual acquaintance suggested you might have compiled relevant documentation. Alexandra Hartwell. Ben felt a jolt of surprise. You've spoken with Alex. Not directly, she clarified. We received an anonymous package containing preliminary documentation and a note suggesting you might have additional evidence. The analysis methods in the documents matched work we know Alexandra had done previously. The realization hit Ben immediately. Alex had found a way to contact environmental attorneys even under Theodore's surveillance. She was still fighting, still trying to protect Cedar Falls. What happens if I provide this information? He asked, his caution giving way to cautious hope. We file for an emergency injunction today, Margaret explained. With sufficient evidence of endangered species habitat and watershed risks, we can potentially halt the project pending comprehensive federal review, a process that typically takes 6 to 8 months. Ben made his decision. Wait here. He returned to his truck, retrieving the backup copies of their research from his emergency bag. The comprehensive documentation he and Alex had compiled represented their best chance at legally halting the Cedar Falls project. Sharing it now might expose his involvement and potentially his connection to Alex, but the alternative was watching the forest fall to Hartwell's bulldozers. When he returned, Margaret Chen spent nearly an hour reviewing the materials, her expression growing increasingly focused, as she recognized the significance of what she was seeing. This is extraordinary, she said finally. The habitat mapping alone would trigger mandatory federal review under the Endangered Species Act. Combined with the watershed contamination projections and indigenous cultural site documentation, this is exactly what we need. How quickly can you act on it? Ben asked. I'll file the emergency injunction this afternoon, she promised. With this evidence, we have a strong case for immediate suspension of all permitting pending full environmental review. After she left with the documentation, Ben felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. They had a chance now to legally protect Cedar Falls, but his direct involvement potentially exposed him to Theodore's retaliation. More importantly, it raised questions about Alex's situation. Had she managed to send the materials herself, or had someone else acted on her behalf? Was she free to make her own choices or operating under constraints imposed by her grandfather? The answers came sooner than expected. That evening, as Ben helped Maya with her homework, breaking news interrupted regular television programming. The screen showed Alexandra Hartwell at a hastily arranged press conference wearing a corporate suit that seemed at odds with the woman Ben had come to know in his cabin. Turn it up, he told Maya, his attention fixed on Alex's composed expression. After careful review of the environmental assessments and economic projections, Alex was saying, her voice steady and professional, Hartwell Environmental Corporation is proceeding with the Cedar Falls development project as scheduled. The economic benefits to the region will be substantial, creating jobs and sustainable growth for communities that badly need investment. Ben felt as if he'd been physically struck. The words contradicted everything Alex had fought for during their time together, everything she claimed to believe about environmental protection and corporate responsibility. The carefully articulated support for the project, delivered with apparent conviction, suggested Theodore had succeeded in bringing his granddaughter back in line. That's not what Alex believes, Maya said with the absolute certainty of childhood. She told me those trees are more important than money. Ben muted the television, his thoughts churning. Either Alex had been playing an elaborate game all along, gaining his trust to learn about opposition strategies while secretly remaining loyal to Hartwell Environmental, or she was being coerced into making statements she didn't believe. Neither possibility offered much comfort. Sometimes grown-ups have to say things for complicated reasons, he tried to explain to Maya, though the justification sounded weak even to him. Is that why she looks sad even though she's smiling? Maya asked, her observation again cutting to the heart of the matter. Ben looked more closely at the screen. Behind Alex's professional delivery and practiced smile, there was indeed a tension around her eyes, a tightness in her posture that suggested internal conflict. Was it possible she was sending a different message than her words conveyed? His phone rang, interrupting his analysis. It was Margaret Chen from Breakwater Environmental. "We've filed the emergency injunction," she informed him without preamble. "Judge Winters has granted a temporary restraining order, halting all Cedar Falls activities, pending a full hearing next week." "Even with Alex's public statement supporting the project?" Ben asked, surprised. "Especially because of it," Margaret replied. The contradiction between her public position and the evidence she provided creates exactly the kind of procedural inconsistency that demands judicial review. It was brilliant strategy. Ben's confusion must have been evident in his silence because Margaret continued with gentle clarity. "Ranger Torres, I believe Ms. Hartwell is operating under significant constraints. Her public statement supporting the project while simultaneously providing evidence to stop it suggests she's playing a complex game with high stakes. Whatever her public position, her actions tell a different story." After ending the call, Ben stared at the television where Alex was now answering carefully selected media questions. The possibility that she was deliberately playing both sides, publicly supporting the project while secretly undermining it, aligned with the strategic thinking she had demonstrated during their collaboration. But it also raised the stakes dramatically for her personally. If Theodore discovered her deception, the consequences would be severe. The next morning brought the fallout from the injunction. Local news reported that Hartwell Environmental Operations at Cedar Falls had been suspended by federal court order, with company representatives expressing shock and disappointment at the decision. Theodore Hartwell was quoted promising to vigorously contest this unwarranted interference in legitimate business operations. Ben monitored the situation while maintaining his regular ranger duties, uncertain what his next move should be. Direct contact with Alex seemed inadvisable, given Theodore's surveillance capabilities, yet he needed to know if she was safe if the legal maneuver had exposed her to additional risk. His answer came in an unexpected form. 3 days after the injunction, Ben returned from his shift to find Maya chatting animatedly with Mrs. Abernathy, their elderly neighbor who occasionally watched her after school. "Daddy, look what came in the mail," Maya exclaimed, holding up a large envelope. "It's from a butterfly science place." The package contained educational materials from the Pacific Northwest Lepidoptera Research Foundation, butterfly identification guides, conservation information, and a child-friendly research journal. A handwritten note on foundation letterhead read simply, "For a promising young scientist, keep observing and protecting the natural world. Dr. E. Morgan." Ben recognized the handwriting immediately as Alex's, though he had never heard of Dr. E. Morgan or any connection to a butterfly research foundation. The message was clear nonetheless. She was thinking of Maya finding ways to maintain contact despite the circumstances. Tucked inside the research journal, he found a smaller envelope addressed to him. Inside was a brief note and a flash drive. "Federal review will take time. Theodore already seeking alternatives. Watch for subsidiary land purchases bordering western boundary. More evidence on drive. Trust only breakwater team. Stay safe." The warning confirmed Ben's suspicions that Theodore wouldn't simply accept the injunction, but would look for ways around it. The reference to subsidiary land purchases suggested Hartwell Environmental might be attempting to create alternative access points to the forest, potentially allowing limited operations even under the restraining order. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ben reviewed the contents of the flash drive. It contained internal Hartwell documents showing the company had created 3 new shell corporations in the past week, each pursuing land acquisitions adjacent to Cedar Falls. The strategy was clear: establish multiple small operations that individually might fly under regulatory radar, then connect them once established. More disturbing was a folder labeled Taurus Surveillance, containing security reports on Ben's movements, photographs of him and Maya at various locations around town, and transcripts of his conversations at the ranger station. The level of monitoring was chilling, far beyond what Ben had anticipated, even knowing Theodore's resources. A final document titled Contingency Options outlined potential strategies for neutralizing opposition to the Cedar Falls project, including investigating financial irregularities in ranger station management and anonymous concerns about Torres's fitness as a single parent. The implied threats against his career and custody of Maya made Theodore's willingness to use any leverage brutally clear. Ben sat back processing the implications. Alex had managed to access and share this information despite presumably being under close supervision herself, suggesting she had allies within Hartwell Environmental or exceptional skills at navigating corporate surveillance. More immediately, he and Maya were under more direct threat than he had realized. The next morning, Ben called in sick to the ranger station for the first time in years. Instead of reporting for duty, he took Maya to stay with his sister in Seattle, explaining it as an impromptu spring break visit. His sister asked no questions when he requested she keep Maya away from social media and avoid mentioning their location to anyone back in Cedar Falls. Just some workplace drama I need to sort out, he explained casually, though Jenny's expression made it clear she sensed there was more to the situation. Whatever it is you know, we're here for you, she assured him, hugging Maya close. Stay as long as you need. Returning to Cedar Falls alone, Ben implemented the security measures Alex had outlined in a document on the flash drive. He transferred sensitive files to encrypted storage, installed the recommended privacy apps on his devices, and began varying his routines to make surveillance more difficult. The temporary separation from Maya was painful but necessary. Theodore's apparent willingness to use her as leverage against both Ben and Alex created an unacceptable risk. With Maya safely away from Cedar Falls, Ben could focus on protecting the forest without fear for his daughter's safety. A week passed in tense silence. The injunction hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, with both sides preparing their arguments. Hartwell Environmental had deployed its full legal team, while Breakwater Environmental represented the coalition of conservation groups and community organizations opposing the project. Ben maintained his regular ranger duties, carefully avoiding any direct communication with Alex or obvious connection to the legal proceedings. The distance felt necessary but frustrating, especially as questions about her true position continued to trouble him. The public Alexandra Hartwell, who appeared in corporate statements supporting the project, seemed entirely different from the passionate environmental advocate who had shared his cabin and helped his daughter with her butterfly project. On Friday afternoon, as Ben was completing paperwork at the ranger station, his supervisor approached with an unusual request. Torres, there's a film crew at Cedar Point wanting to document old-growth specimens for some corporate environmental initiative. They've got all the permits, but they need a ranger escort. Everyone else is tied up with the controlled burn on the eastern boundary. Ben hesitated, suspicious of any unusual requests given recent events. Corporate Environmental Initiative, which company? Something called Horizon Sustainability, his supervisor said, checking the paperwork. They're cleared through Portland office. Two-person crew scheduled for today only. The name didn't trigger any immediate concerns, and the timing, late Friday when the station was minimally staffed, could be coincidental. Still, Ben approached the assignment with caution, making sure his location tracking was disabled on all devices before heading to Cedar Point. The film crew consisted of a man and woman with professional camera equipment and identification from Horizon Sustainability, a consultancy Ben had never heard of. The woman was adjusting camera settings when he arrived her back to him as she worked. Ranger Torres, the man greeted him. Thanks for the escort. We're documenting old-growth Douglas fir specimens for a conservation database. Shouldn't take more than an hour. Ben nodded, still wary, as he led them along the trail to the oldest tree stands in the area. The woman followed slightly behind, seemingly focused on equipment preparations. Only when they reached a clearing, half a mile from the parking area, did she finally speak. The northwestern old-growth corridor connects directly to the watershed, Ben. We need to document that specifically. He froze at the sound of her voice, then turned slowly to face Alexandra Hartwell. She had changed her appearance subtly but effectively. Darker hair pulled back severely, glasses, outdoor clothing that contrasted sharply with her corporate image. But her eyes were unmistakable, as was the intensity of her gaze as she met his. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly, glancing at her companion, who was now scanning the surrounding area with practiced efficiency. James is my personal security chief, Alex explained, following his gaze. He's the only staff member not reporting to Theodore. We have maybe 15 minutes before my absence from the approved corporate retreat is noticed. Ben processed this information rapidly, understanding the risk she was taking by being here. The injunction hearing is compromised, she cut in. Theodore has connections to Judge Winter's family. He's exerting pressure to have the injunction lifted and the case dismissed. So, all of this was for nothing, Ben said, frustration evident in his voice. Your evidence, the legal challenge, just delaying tactics. Alex shook her head. Not nothing. It bought us time to implement the real strategy. She handed him a slim folder. These are land transfer documents for 14,000 acres surrounding Cedar Falls, including the entire watershed in old-growth corridors. Ben opened the folder, struggling to understand the legal language. Transfer to who? The Oregon Environmental Land Trust, Alex said. I've been liquidating my personal assets, property investments, art collections, everything not tied to Hartwell Environmental corporate ownership. The purchases were made through shell companies to prevent Theodore from blocking them, then immediately transferred to the trust with permanent conservation easements. The magnitude of what she was describing slowly dawned on Ben. You bought the land yourself to protect it. Not all of it yet, Alex clarified. These transfers represent about 60% of the critical habitat. The remaining acquisitions are in process but moving slowly to avoid triggering Theodore's attention. Ben stared at her, reassessing everything he thought he knew about Alexandra Hartwell. The corporate heiress hadn't just been fighting her grandfather's project from within the system. She had been systematically dismantling her own fortune to create permanent protection for the forest. Why, he asked finally, why give up billions of dollars for this? Alex's expression softened briefly. You showed me what it means to live authentically, Ben. You and Maya. For 11 days in your cabin, I experienced a life with actual purpose, not just profit. I can't go back to being the person I was before. James approached quietly, checking his watch. 5 minutes, Ms. Hartwell. Alex nodded, returning her attention to Ben. Theodore is planning to announce a revised Cedar Falls plan next week. Smaller footprint, more sustainable practices, designed to circumvent the endangered species concerns. The land transfers should block most of it, but he'll look for weaknesses. And what happens to you when he discovers what you've done? Ben asked the question that had been troubling him since her disappearance. I have contingency plans, she replied, not quite meeting his eyes. The important thing is securing the remaining land parcels before he realizes what's happening. The evasion was obvious, but before Ben could press further, James signaled again with greater urgency. We need to move now, he insisted. Security protocols just changed on your grandfather's calendar. He's returning to Portland early. Alex handed Ben a secure phone. This line is safe. I'll contact you when I can. She hesitated, then added, How's Maya? Safe with my sister in Seattle, Ben replied. She misses you. The butterfly materials were a hit. A genuine smile briefly transformed Alex's face, revealing the woman Ben had come to know in his cabin rather than the corporate executive she presented to the world. Tell her to keep observing. The migration season is just beginning. With that cryptic message, she turned to leave, but Ben caught her arm gently. Alex, whatever you're planning, be careful. Theodore has demonstrated he'll use any means necessary. I know exactly what he's capable of, she said, her expression darkening momentarily. I've been watching him destroy things my entire life. This time will be different. As Alex and James disappeared back down the trail toward their vehicle, Ben remained in the clearing, the land transfer documents heavy in his hands. The scale of Alex's actions, systematically liquidating her personal fortune to protect Cedar Falls, contradicted any lingering doubts about her commitment. Whatever game she was playing with Theodore, her true priorities were now unmistakable. The following days brought a flurry of activity around Cedar Falls. True to Alex's warning, Hartwell Environmental announced a revised development plan with a reduced environmental footprint, emphasizing sustainable forestry practices and conservation set-asides. The carefully crafted proposal seemed designed specifically to address the concerns raised in the injunction filing, potentially undermining the legal challenge before the hearing. Ben forwarded the land transfer documents to Margaret Chen at Breakwater Environmental, who confirmed their authenticity with cautious excitement. The strategic acquisition of critical habitat parcels created a legal barrier to Hartwell's plans that would be difficult to circumvent regardless of the injunction outcome. This is extraordinary, Margaret told him during their secure call. Someone has systematically created a conservation corridor that effectively blocks access to the most valuable timber stands. The easement language is ironclad. These lands can never be developed or logged. What about the remaining parcels? Ben asked, thinking of Alex's mention of ongoing acquisitions. Still vulnerable, Margaret confirmed, particularly the northwestern sector, where Hartwell has already established preliminary road access. If they move quickly, they could still access about 30% of the original project area. The information aligned with Ben's own analysis. While Alex had managed to protect the most ecologically critical areas, significant portions of Cedar Falls remained at risk if Theodore pushed forward aggressively with his revised plan. Ben returned to his regular patrol duties with heightened awareness, documenting any unusual activity around the forest boundaries. He noted increased presence of survey teams and geological assessment crews, signs that Hartwell Environmental was reevaluating its options in light of the changed circumstances. The secure phone Alex had provided remained silent for 3 days. When it finally activated, it wasn't with the call, but with an automated message containing coordinates and a timed Cedar Creek Bridge midnight. The location was within his patrol area but rarely visited, a perfect meeting point away from potential surveillance. Ben arrived early, parking his truck at a service access point and hiking the remaining distance. The night was clear and cool, a quarter moon providing just enough light to navigate the familiar terrain without a flashlight that might draw attention. Alex was already waiting at the bridge alone this time, dressed in practical outdoor clothing that allowed her to blend with the shadows. She looked tired. Ben thought the strain of her double life evident in the tightness around her eyes. Theodore moved the timeline up, she said without preamble. He's sending in equipment tomorrow for the Northwestern Sector, planning to establish operations before the injunction hearing. Can he do that legally? Ben asked, though he already suspected the answer. He's claiming the revised plan constitutes a separate project not covered by the current injunction, Alex explained. It's legally questionable, but by the time it's challenged in court, they'll have established presence on the ground. Wow, so we've failed. Ben concluded the prospect of watching even a portion of Cedar Falls fall to Hartwell's bulldozers, hitting him with physical force. Not yet, Alex said, her expression hardening with determination. I've been accelerating the remaining land acquisitions, but Theodore has started blocking real estate transactions throughout the region, making it nearly impossible to complete the conservation corridor. She paced the small bridge, the rushing water below echoing her evident frustration. I need more time or a different approach. Theodore has frozen most of my remaining liquid assets pending a corporate audit, and he's watching every move I make. Ben studied her, noting the careful way she held herself as if physically containing some stronger emotion. There's something you are not telling me. Alex stopped pacing, her gaze shifting to the dark forest around them. Theodore is planning to announce my extended leave of absence next week. He's been building a narrative about mental health concerns, erratic behavior, setting the stage to have me declared incompetent to manage my affairs. Can he do that? Ben asked, alarmed by the escalation. With enough money and the right doctors, yes. Alex's voice was matter-of-fact, though the implications were chilling. It's a contingency plan he's had in place since my mother challenged him years ago. I've seen the paperwork, carefully documented concerns about my stability, selective evidence of troubling behavior. That's why you've been playing along with the corporate statements, Ben remarked, buying time while trying to protect the forest. Alex nodded. The moment I openly oppose him, he'll implement the competency challenge. Once that happens, I lose all remaining financial control and any ability to protect what's left of Cedar Falls. The full picture of her precarious position came into focus for Ben. Alex wasn't just fighting to protect the forest. She was fighting for her own freedom against a grandfather willing to declare her mentally unfit to maintain control of both her and the company. There has to be a way to stop him, Ben said, his concern now extending well beyond the fate of Cedar Falls. There is, Alex replied, her voice taking on a new resolve. But it requires sacrificing everything I've been trying to preserve. She outlined her plan, a high-risk strategy that would permanently sever her connection to Hartwell Environmental and likely most of her remaining inheritance, but might create the leverage needed to protect the remaining forest lands. Theodore values the company's reputation above everything, she explained. It's the one vulnerability he can't simply buy his way out of. As Ben listened, he recognized the calculated risk she was proposing, using her position as a Hartwell to potentially destroy her future as one. The personal cost would be enormous with no guarantee of success. There must be another way, he argued, one that doesn't require you to sacrifice everything. Alex's smile was sad but determined. Some things are worth the sacrifice, Ben. You taught me that. Every day, you put the forest and Maya ahead of easier paths or personal gain. She checked her watch, aware their time was limited by security concerns. I need to return before my absence is noted. The Northwestern Sector is the immediate priority. If Theodore establishes operations there tomorrow, it creates precedent for the rest of his revised plan. What can I do? Ben asked, accepting that her decision was made. Be ready, Alex said simply. When Theodore moves, I'll need to act immediately. Maya should stay away until this is resolved. He's demonstrated willingness to use her as leverage against both of us. The mention of his daughter reminded Ben of the personal stakes beyond the forest. She asks about you every day, he said softly. The butterfly journal is her prized possession now. Something flickered across Alex's expression, a complex emotion that suggested both pleasure and pain at the connection to Maya. Tell her I'm still working on our project, she said finally. Some experiments take longer than others. Before leaving, Alex hesitated, then reached into her jacket and withdrew a small notebook. My mother's research journal, she explained, handing it to Ben. It documents the environmental violations that likely caused her illness, including test results from soil and water samples at Hartwell facilities. If anything happens to me, make sure it reaches Margaret Chen at Breakwater. The implication that she might be prevented from completing her plan herself hung between them, unspoken, but understood. Ben took the journal, recognizing it as both practical evidence and a deeply personal trust. Be careful, he said, the inadequate words carrying the weight of everything they weren't directly addressing. The connection formed during her time at his cabin, the shared purpose that had grown into something more complex, the uncertain future they both faced. Alex nodded, then surprised him by stepping forward and placing her hand against his cheek, the touch brief but intentional. Whatever happens next, those 11 days in your cabin were the most authentic of my life. Thank you for showing me what that feels like. Before Ben could respond, she turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving him standing on the bridge with her mother's journal and the weight of her impending sacrifice heavy in his hands. The following day unfolded exactly as Alex had warned. Hartwell environmental equipment began arriving at the northwestern sector of Cedar Falls early morning. Bulldozers, portable offices, survey equipment. Ben observed from a distance during his regular patrol, documenting the activity while maintaining his official ranger responsibilities. Local news reported on the revised Cedar Falls Sustainable Forestry Initiative, featuring carefully selected footage of Theodore Hartwell discussing environmental considerations and community benefits. There was no mention of Alexandra Hartwell in the coverage, her absence conspicuous given her position as CEO. By mid-afternoon, preliminary road clearing had begun at the sector boundary, the sound of heavy machinery breaking the forest quiet. Ben filed the required reports documenting potential environmental impacts, though he held little hope that standard regulatory responses would come quickly enough to matter. He was completing this paperwork when his supervisor approached with an unusual expression, somewhere between concern and confusion. Torres, you need to see this, he said, turning up the volume on the break room television. The screen showed a hastily arranged press conference unlike any Ben had seen before. Alexandra Hartwell stood alone at a podium without the corporate backdrop or support staff that typically accompanied Hartwell environmental announcements. She wore simple professional attire rather than designer labels, her expression composed but determined. Thank you for coming on such short notice, she began, her voice stone. I'm speaking today not as CEO of Hartwell Environmental, but as an individual with information the public deserves to know. What followed was extraordinary. A comprehensive account of Hartwell Environmental's environmental violations spanning decades, including falsified impact reports, suppressed research on contamination, and deliberate evasion of regulatory oversight. Alex methodically outlined how the company had manipulated data, intimidated scientists, and leveraged political connections to avoid accountability. The Cedar Falls project represents a continuation of these practices, she stated clearly. Despite public statements about sustainability and environmental responsibility, internal documents confirm the intent to maximize resource extraction regardless of ecological cost. Ben watched in stunned silence as Alex systematically dismantled her family company's environmental record, providing specific examples, dates, and references to documentation she promised would be provided to regulatory agencies and media organizations. As CEO, I bear responsibility for continuing these practices, she acknowledged. My attempts to reform the company from within have failed largely due to resistance from the board and specifically from Theodore Hartwell, who continues to exercise control through financial leverage and corporate governance manipulation. The camera cut briefly to show Theodore entering the back of the room, his expression thunderous as he realized what was happening. Security personnel moved to intercept him, preventing immediate interruption of the press conference. Effective immediately, I am resigning as CEO of Hartwell Environmental, Alex announced. Additionally, I am surrendering my voting shares to an independent environmental trust with binding instructions to oppose any projects threatening critical ecosystems, including Cedar Falls. The room erupted with questions, reporters shouting over each other as the unprecedented corporate self-immolation unfolded live. Alex maintained her composure, answering selected questions with precise detail that underscored her intimate knowledge of the company's operations and violations. When asked about potential legal or financial repercussions for her actions, her response was simple. Some principles are worth any cost. The truth about Hartwell Environmental's environmental record is one of them. The broadcast cut to stunned news anchors attempting to contextualize what they just witnessed. The heir to one of the largest environmental exploitation companies in the Pacific Northwest, publicly exposing its practices and relinquishing her position and control. In the ranger station break room, Ben's colleagues were discussing the bombshell revelations with growing excitement about implications for Cedar Falls. Ben remained silent, processing the magnitude of what Alex had just done. She had effectively burned every bridge to her former life, exposed herself to potential legal action, and almost certainly triggered Theodore's threatened competency challenge, all to create the leverage needed to protect the remaining forest lands. The sacrifice was even more complete than their midnight discussion had suggested. Alex hadn't just resigned. She had systematically undermined the company's entire environmental position, creating a public relations crisis that would force immediate reevaluation of all ongoing projects, including Cedar Falls. Ben's secure phone vibrated with a message. "It's done. Watch Northwestern Sector. T will retaliate immediately." He understood the warning. Theodore, furious at the public exposure, would likely accelerate operations at Cedar Falls to establish facts on the ground before regulatory responses could mobilize. The next few hours would be critical. As Ben prepared to return to patrol, focusing on the Northwestern Sector, his supervisor called him into the office. "Just got word from Portland headquarters," he said, his expression troubled. "All Ranger personnel are to avoid the Hartwell operational areas until further notice. Direct orders from the regional director." The political pressure was already being applied, Ben realized. Theodore's connections reaching into the Forest Service command structure to prevent documentation of accelerated operations. "That's a violation of standard environmental monitoring protocols," Ben pointed out. "We're required to maintain access to all Forest Service lands regardless of private operations." "Take it up with Portland," his supervisor replied with evident frustration. "My hands are tied on this one. Just stay clear of the Northwestern Sector for now." Ben nodded, appearing to accept the directive while already planning how to circumvent it. His responsibility to the forest transcended administrative orders, particularly ones that appeared politically motivated. As he left the ranger station, his phone vibrated again with another message from Alex. "Meeting tonight. Same place. Critical information." Whatever came next, Ben realized would determine not just the fate of Cedar Falls, but potentially Alex's future as well. She had sacrificed her corporate position and likely her inheritance to create this moment of vulnerability for Theodore's plans. What remained to be seen was whether it would be enough to save the forest, and what personal price she would ultimately pay for her defiance. The midnight forest wrapped around Ben like a living presence as he made his way to the Cedar Creek Bridge. No moon tonight, only starlight filtered through ancient branches, casting more shadows than illumination. He moved with practiced silence, years of ranger work having taught him how to traverse these woods without disturbing their natural rhythms. Alex was already waiting, her silhouette barely visible against the darkness. She stood completely still, watching the water rush beneath the bridge, lost in thought, until Ben's approach pulled her attention back. "Theodore's moving faster than I anticipated," she said without preamble, her voice tight with urgency. "The Northwestern Sector operation isn't just about establishing presence before the injunction hearing. It's phase one of a completely different strategy." Ben joined her at the bridge railing, close enough to speak quietly. "Different how all mining rights." Alex handed him a flash drive. "Hartwell Environmental filed mineral exploration permits 6 months ago under a subsidiary I wasn't aware of. The geological surveys weren't for road stability. They were assessing copper and rare earth mineral deposits." Ben absorbed this information with growing concern. Mining has different regulatory frameworks than logging. Exactly. Much more difficult to block with environmental injunctions once permits are secured. Alex's fingers tightened on the railing. Theodore knew the logging project might face challenges, so he created a parallel approach. If logging gets blocked, he pivots to mining operations, which would effectively clear-cut the forest anyway, while extracting minerals beneath. That's why he's so focused on the northwestern sector, Ben realized. The preliminary surveys must have shown promising deposits there. Alex nodded. The flash drive contains the geological assessments. The deposits extend throughout Cedar Falls, but the richest concentrations are in the northwestern quadrant. Once they establish mining operations there, they'll have legal precedent to expand throughout the forest. The comprehensiveness of Theodore's strategy was chilling. A backup plan designed to circumvent any environmental protections focused solely on timber resources. Ben thought of the forest above them, the complex ecosystem that had evolved over centuries, all potentially sacrificed for minerals that could be extracted elsewhere, but not as profitably. Your press conference, he said. The company's environmental record exposure. Will that help stop this? It creates public relations pressure and potential regulatory scrutiny, but Theodore is already implementing damage control. Alex's expression hardened. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning to formalize my removal and appoint interim leadership, people entirely loyal to him. Once that happens, the company will issue statements dismissing my claims as personally motivated and unsubstantiated. But you have evidence, Ben countered. The documentation you provided to Margaret Chen will take months to process through regulatory channels and courts, Alex finished. By then, the northwestern sector mining operation will be established. Theodore knows exactly how to work the system. Initial permits, preliminary operations, then legal delays, while extraction continues. The strategy was depressingly familiar to Ben from years of environmental advocacy. Companies often established operations first, then leveraged economic and employment arguments to maintain them, while legal challenges dragged through courts. So what's our next move? He asked, refusing to accept defeat despite the escalating odds. Alex straightened her posture, shifting from contemplation to resolve. We need to physically document what's happening in the northwestern sector, not just equipment staging, but any preliminary extraction or testing activities. If they're operating beyond current permit allowances, we can file for emergency cessation. The Forest Service has been ordered to avoid the area, Ben reminded her. Not as Forest Service, Alex clarified. As private citizens documenting potential environmental violations. I've arranged for James to bring specialized photographic equipment capable of capturing evidence, even in low-light conditions. Ben considered the risks. Theodore will have security personnel throughout the site, which is why we need someone who knows the terrain intimately. Alex turned to face him fully. I can't do this alone, Ben, but I understand if it's too dangerous given your responsibility to Maya. The mention of his daughter gave Ben pause. Any direct confrontation with Hartwell Security carried significant personal risk. To his job, possibly his freedom if Theodore manufactured charges. Yet the alternative, watching Cedar Falls fall to Theodore's mining operation, was equally unacceptable. Maya loves this forest as much as I do, he said finally. What kind of example would I set by standing aside while it's destroyed? Alex's relief was visible, even in the darkness. James will meet us with equipment at the old Fire Road junction in 1 hour. We'll need to approach from the eastern boundary where security coverage is thinnest. As they finalized their plan, Ben felt a peculiar lightness despite the danger ahead. After weeks of strategic planning and legal maneuvering, they were taking direct action. Something tangible in defense of the forest they both loved. An hour later, they rendezvoused with James at the designated location. The former military specialist had brought not just specialized camera equipment, but also communications gear and topographical overlays showing security patrol patterns based on his reconnaissance. Main security contingent is concentrated at the road construction site, James explained, indicating the northwestern entry point where equipment had been arriving all day. Secondary teams are patrolling the perimeter here and here, but there's a gap in coverage along this ridgeline. He traced a route that would take them to an elevated position overlooking the main operational area. From this vantage point, we should be able to document any activities without being detected. Ms. Hartwell, I've prepared appropriate clothing and gear for you. Alex exchanged her more urban attire for dark outdoor clothing, similar to Ben's Ranger gear, applying a dark camouflage cream to her face that James provided. The transformation was striking. Nothing remained of the corporate executive who had faced news cameras hours earlier. Communications check, James said, handing them each a small earpiece. Channel secured and encrypted. If we're separated, maintain radio silence unless absolutely necessary. Ben led them into the forest, moving away from established trails toward the natural passage routes he'd discovered during years of patrolling. The darkness that would have disoriented most visitors was a familiar environment to him, each tree and rock formation a landmark in his mental map of Cedar Falls. They moved in silence for nearly 40 minutes, climbing steadily toward the ridgeline that would provide observation access to the northwestern sector. As they approached the final ascent, James raised a hand in warning, gesturing for them to take cover. Voices carried from ahead, Hartwell security personnel on an unscheduled patrol. Ben guided them into a dense thicket where they waited motionless as flashlight beams swept the surrounding forest. The guards passed within 20 feet, close enough for their conversation to be clearly audible. Accelerated timeline confirmed for tomorrow, one was saying. Full equipment deployment at 0600 extraction testing by noon. Old man's not wasting any time, his companion replied. Guess the granddaughter's little press stunt lit a fire under him. She won't be a problem much longer. Heard they're having her picked up tonight. Mental health evaluation or some bullshit. Either way, she'll be contained. The casual confirmation of Theodore's plan to have Alex forcibly detained sent a chill through Ben. He glanced at her in the darkness, finding her expression grimly unsurprised. She'd known this was coming, had anticipated this exact retaliation when she chose to hold her press conference. Once the patrol passed, they continued toward the ridgeline with increased urgency. The timeline had compressed dramatically. Whatever evidence they gathered needed to be documented and distributed before Theodore implemented his plan to have Alex detained. They reached the observation point shortly after midnight. The northwestern sector spread below them, partially illuminated by portable floodlights that revealed far more than equipment staging. Drilling apparatus had already been assembled, with core sample collection underway, activities well beyond the scope of current permits. They're conducting preliminary extraction testing, Alex whispered, documenting the scene with the specialized camera. That's explicitly prohibited without completed environmental impact assessment and tribal consultation. Ben used the high-powered binoculars James provided to study the operation more closely. Those aren't standard geological survey protocols. They're using industrial extraction testing methods, the kind typically reserved for sites already approved for full mining operations. The scale of the violation was significant. Theodore wasn't just preparing for mining operations, he was conducting them under the guise of preliminary assessment, circumventing numerous regulatory requirements in the process. We need soil and water samples, Alex said, lowering the camera. Photographic evidence is strong, but physical samples proving contamination from testing would trigger immediate regulatory response. Ben nodded, recognizing the necessity despite the increased risk. There's a drainage channel on the northwestern edge of the site. Any chemical agents or disrupted soil would collect there before flowing into Cedar Creek. I'll maintain observation and communication support from here, James offered. If security patterns change, I can provide advance warning. With the plan established, Ben led Alex along the ridgeline toward the drainage area, moving with increased caution as they approached the illuminated perimeter of the operation. The sounds of machinery and voices grew louder, requiring them to communicate through hand signals rather than whispers. They reached the drainage channel at the edge of the site, finding exactly what they had feared. Discolored water carrying obvious sediment and chemical traces from the drilling operation. Alex removed sample containers from her pack, carefully collecting water and soil specimens while Ben maintained lookout. The evidence gathering was nearly complete when floodlights suddenly shifted, illuminating their position. A shout went up from the nearest security guard, followed by the sound of multiple personnel running in their direction. Move, Ben urged, helping Alex secure the samples in her pack. Back to the ridgeline, now. They fled into the darkness, pursued by flashlight beams and the crash of security personnel following. James's voice came through their earpieces, calm despite the crisis. Security converging from northwest and northeast. Proceed directly south to Extraction Point Alpha. We'll meet you there. Ben led Alex through the forest at dangerous speed, relying on his intimate knowledge of the terrain to avoid obstacles that slowed their pursuers. They crossed a shallow stream, continued through dense underbrush, and finally emerged on a maintenance trail that would lead to their designated extraction point. Almost there, Ben encouraged as they ran, aware that Alex was pushing through exhaustion. Just beyond that rise. They crested the hill to find James waiting with the vehicle, but also to discover more headlights approaching from the main road. Hartwell Security had anticipated their escape route and called in reinforcements. Alternative extraction required, James stated calmly, already changing direction. Secondary vehicle positioned at Fire Tower Access Road. This way. They abandoned the original plan, cutting through a section of forest Ben knew contained an old logging trail. The sounds of pursuit continued behind them, growing rather than diminishing as additional security personnel joined the search. They're deploying perimeter teams, James reported, checking a handheld device, attempting to establish containment boundary. The implications were clear. Theodore had prepared for this possibility, perhaps even anticipated Alex might attempt to gather evidence at the site. The response was too coordinated, too comprehensive to be improvised. They reached the secondary vehicle, an unmarked SUV with off-road capabilities, and quickly got inside, James taking the wheel. As they accelerated down the fire road, headlights appeared behind them, closing rapidly. Hartwell Security, James confirmed, checking the mirrors. At least 2 vehicles in pursuit. What followed was a dangerous chase through Forest Service roads never designed for high-speed travel. James drove with military precision, using terrain features to gain temporary advantages, but the pursuing vehicles remained stubbornly present behind them. They're hurting us, Ben realized, recognizing the pattern. There are more vehicles ahead at the main junction. His prediction proved correct. As they approached the intersection that would lead back to public roads, 2 additional security vehicles appeared blocking their path. James executed a skilled evasive turn, taking them down a maintenance track that barely qualified as a road. This leads to the eastern fire break, Ben informed them, but it dead ends at Cedar Falls Reservoir. Perfect, James replied cryptically, accelerating rather than slowing. The pursuit continued with increasing intensity, their vehicle taking punishment from the rough terrain as James pushed its capabilities to the limit. The narrow maintenance track finally opened onto the fire break, a wide cleared strip separating forest sections as protection against wildfire spread. Behind them, the Hartwell Security vehicles were gaining ground on the more favorable terrain. Ahead loomed the dark expanse of Cedar Falls Reservoir, effectively trapping them between water and pursuers. James drove directly toward the reservoir at alarming speed. "Secure yourselves," he instructed calmly. "Impact in 20 seconds. Ben realized the security specialist's intention with sudden clarity. "You can't be serious." "Amphibious conversion," Alex explained quickly, bracing herself. "Custom modifications. Hold on." The SUV hit the reservoir's edge at precisely calculated speed, converting forward momentum into a controlled entry to the water. For a terrifying moment, it seemed they would simply sink. Then mechanical sounds emanated from beneath the vehicle as hidden systems engaged, transforming the SUV into a crude but functional watercraft. On the shore behind them, Hartwell Security personnel watched in evident disbelief as their quarry motored slowly across the reservoir, well beyond their reach. The unconventional escape had succeeded, but Ben knew it only bought them temporary advantage. Theodore would simply widen the search perimeter, perhaps even bringing in aerial resources. "Where now?" he asked as they reached the reservoir's far shore, the vehicle converting back to land operations with mechanical efficiency. "Safe house 20 miles east," James replied. "Secure communications evidence processing capabilities. We can transmit the documentation to regulatory agencies and media outlets from there." As they drove through the night toward this unknown destination, Ben studied Alex in the dim dashboard light. She looked simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated, the physical demands of their escape balanced against the triumph of securing critical evidence. "Theodore will escalate dramatically after this," she said, meeting his gaze. "The mental health detention plan was already in motion, but now he'll add trespassing, corporate espionage, theft of proprietary information, anything to discredit the evidence and neutralize us as witnesses." "Us?" Ben questioned. "I was there as a private citizen, not representing the Forest Service." Alex's expression was grimly realistic. "Theodore doesn't make such distinctions. You're now as much a target as I am." We should contact your sister, make sure Maya remains away from Cedar Falls indefinitely. The reminder of his daughter's vulnerability sent a wave of concern through Ben. He had accepted personal risk in joining tonight's operation, but the potential impact on Maya was a heavier consideration. I'll call her when we reach the safe house, he decided. Jenny will understand the need for extended precautions. The safe house proved to be a modest cabin hidden within a private nature preserve, one of several properties Alex had apparently secured through channels Theodore couldn't easily trace. Inside, James efficiently established secure communications while Alex prepared the evidence for documentation and transmission. The samples are definitive, she confirmed after preliminary testing. Chemical agents consistent with industrial mineral extraction, including compounds requiring special handling permits, they definitely haven't secured. Ben helped organize the photographic evidence, selecting the clearest images showing unpermitted activities. This should trigger immediate regulatory response. If we can get it to the right people before Theodore intercepts or discredits it, Alex cautioned, he'll have already activated contingency plans to contain the situation. They worked through the remainder of the night preparing comprehensive documentation packages for environmental regulatory agencies, indigenous tribal authorities with jurisdictional claims, and selected media outlets known for environmental reporting integrity. As dawn approached, James received an alert on his secure communication system. Surveillance detection grid activated, he reported. Multiple vehicles approaching from the main road. Alex moved to the window, confirming what they already suspected. Theodore found us. Security team plus county sheriff vehicles. She turned to Ben, her expression resolute. The evidence transmission is complete, but they'll attempt to seize the physical samples and original documentation. Which means we need to separate, Ben concluded. Split the evidence between us, different escape routes. I'll create a diversion at the north property line, James offered. Draw attention away from the cabin long enough for you both to exit through the forest boundary. The plan was hastily established. James would use one of the backup vehicles to draw pursuit away from the cabin, while Ben and Alex escaped through the forest with the physical evidence divided between them. They would rendezvous at a secondary location after ensuring they weren't followed. As they prepared to implement this desperate strategy, Alex pulled Ben aside. If we're separated, proceed directly to Breakwater Environmental's office in Portland. Margaret Chen will secure the evidence and arrange legal protection. And you, Ben asked, sensing something in her tone that suggested different intentions. I have one more move to make, Alex replied. Something Theodore won't expect. Before Ben could press for details, James signaled from the window. Security teams deploying, diversion starting in 30 seconds. The next moments unfolded with chaotic precision. James departed in a vehicle that immediately drew pursuit, creating the window they needed. Ben and Alex slipped from the cabin's rear entrance, quickly disappearing into the forest border with their precious evidence cargo. They moved rapidly through the morning woods, hearing distant shouts and vehicle engines as the search expanded. Years of ranger experience guided Ben's navigation, choosing paths that minimized visibility while maximizing distance from likely search patterns. After 30 minutes of continuous movement, they paused in a small clearing to verify their position and check for pursuit. The forest remained quiet around them. They had successfully evaded the immediate search. We should reach the secondary road in about 2 miles, Ben said, consulting his mental map of the area. From there we can... The sound of helicopter rotors interrupted his planning. The distinctive rhythm of rotor blades grew louder, approaching their position with uncomfortable precision. Theodore's deployed aerial resources, Alex realized looking up through the canopy. They're using infrared scanning to track our heat signatures. They ran again, searching for denser canopy coverage to mask their thermal signatures, but the helicopter maintained pursuit with concerning accuracy. When they emerged onto a fire road that would have accelerated their escape, 2 Hartwell security vehicles were already waiting personnel, deploying with practiced efficiency. This way, Ben urged, pulling Alex toward a ravine that offered their only remaining escape route. The steep descent was treacherous but temporarily removed them from both aerial and ground observation. At the ravine bottom, they found momentary shelter beneath an overhanging rock formation. The helicopter circled overhead, unable to penetrate the ravine with its sensors, but unwilling to abandon the search. They're hurting us, Ben said, recognizing the tactical approach. Ground teams will be moving to block both ravine exits. Alex nodded grimly, reaching the same conclusion. We need to separate. They're primarily targeting me. You might have a chance to get through with your portion of the evidence. I'm not leaving you, Ben stated firmly. This isn't about us, Alex countered. It's about ensuring the evidence reaches people who can act on it. Split the resources, double the chances. The helicopter's sound intensified as it hovered directly above the ravine, attempting to penetrate their shelter with powerful searchlights. Time for discussion had ended. East Ravine exit leads to Cedar Creek, Ben said quickly. Follow it downstream to the old mill site. There's a maintenance shed with emergency supplies. Wait there if you can, but if you're pursued, continue to Breakwater's office. Alex gripped his arm briefly. Whatever happens next, remember that Theodore will use any leverage available, including Maya. Keep her safe, even if it means. She left the implication unspoken, but Ben understood. Even if it meant abandoning the evidence, abandoning Alex, his daughter's safety had to remain his priority. They split up, Ben taking the Western Ravine exit while Alex headed east toward Cedar Creek. The helicopter immediately followed Alex's path, confirming their theory that she remained Theodore's primary target. Ben made significant progress before encountering the first security team blocking his exit route. He evaded them by climbing the ravine wall at its steepest point. A dangerous ascent few would attempt, but one his ranger training had prepared him for. Reaching the forest above, he continued toward the secondary road, maintaining careful awareness of pursuit signs. The divided security forces had thin coverage enough that his escape seemed increasingly possible. Then his secure phone vibrated with an urgent message from James. All units redirected to Cedar Creek Mill, surrounded. Proceed directly to Breakwater with evidence. Ben's heart sank as he processed the implications. Alex had been captured, likely sacrificing her own escape to ensure his success. The rational strategy was exactly as James directed. Secure the physical evidence by proceeding directly to Breakwater Environmental's offices in Portland. Yet he found himself changing direction, moving instead toward the old mill site at Cedar Creek. The decision defied strategic logic but aligned with something deeper. He couldn't abandon Alex to Theodore's retribution, regardless of the mission's broader objectives. As he approached the mill site, the scope of Theodore's response became clear. Multiple vehicles surrounded the area, the security personnel establishing a perimeter, and at the center, a confrontation unfolding exactly as it had in the flash-forward that opened their story. Ben watched from concealed position as Theodore stood before assembled media representatives, Alex flanked by security personnel, her expression composed despite the circumstances. The scene matched his first glimpse of this story with disturbing precision. The powerful grandfather asserting control, the security detail, the media presence recording it all. My granddaughter has been experiencing concerning psychological episodes, Theodore was explaining to the cameras. Her recent behavior, including industrial espionage against her own company, represents symptoms of a condition requiring professional intervention. Two individuals in medical attire stood nearby with a prepared transport vehicle, the physical manifestation of Theodore's threat to have Alex detained on mental health grounds. The tableau represented Theodore's comprehensive victory, discrediting Alex's evidence by questioning her stability while removing her ability to continue fighting. Ben recognized the moment required immediate action despite overwhelming tactical disadvantage. He moved closer, evaluating potential approaches when something unexpected occurred. Alex straightened suddenly, her posture shifting from apparent defeat to composed authority. Before these proceedings continue, she said clearly, her voice carrying to media microphones, I believe relevant information should be shared with everyone present. Theodore moved to interrupt her, but Alex continued with practiced projection that commanded attention. I've just received confirmation that federal environmental protection officials have obtained physical evidence of unpermitted extraction activities and hazardous chemical use at the Cedar Falls northwestern sector. This was untrue. The evidence was divided between Alex and Ben, not yet delivered to officials. Yet the confidence in her statement gave even Theodore momentary pause. Additionally, Alex continued into this hesitation. The Oregon Attorney General's office has opened an investigation into Hartwell environmental corporate governance irregularities, specifically examining evidence that Theodore Hartwell has been manipulating company operations without proper board authorization. The strategic brilliance of her approach dawned on Ben as he watched Theodore's reaction. Alex was creating public assertions that Theodore would feel compelled to address and deny, extending the confrontation long enough for media to fully document it while potentially delaying her detention. Theodore recovered quickly, moving to reassert control. My granddaughter's statements demonstrate exactly the concerning behavior I've described. These delusional claims are supported by documentary evidence ready in regulatory possession, Alex interrupted smoothly, including financial transactions showing Theodore Hartwell's personal enrichment through subsidiary companies contracting with Hartwell Environmental, transactions never disclosed to shareholders or the board. The strategic accusations struck with precision at Theodore's most vulnerable point, his carefully constructed public reputation. Each claim created questions that would require investigation, establishing a public record that couldn't be easily dismissed. Ben recognized the opportunity Alex was creating. While all attention focused on this confrontation, he could potentially approach from the blind side of the security perimeter, using the distraction to free her from immediate detention. He began moving carefully around the perimeter, staying within forest cover, while advancing toward the transport vehicle. The security focus remained entirely on the confrontation between Theodore and Alex, creating the opening he needed. As Ben reached position, Alex escalated her strategy, addressing the media directly. I invite any journalist present to request Theodore Hartwell's financial disclosures regarding personal holdings in mining operations, specifically targeting Cedar Falls. The documentation will prove illuminating. Theodore's expression darkened dangerously. He gestured to the medical personnel, clearly intent on ending Alex's public statements immediately. This unfortunate episode has continued long enough. My granddaughter requires immediate professional assistance. The medical team moved forward, and Ben recognized his window of opportunity closing. He emerged from concealment behind the transport vehicle, prepared to create a distraction that might allow Alex to break free. A desperate gambit with minimal chance of success against the assembled security forces. Before he could act, however, the confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of multiple unmarked vehicles. Men and women in formal attire emerged, several displaying federal identification. Theodore Hartwell, one announced with calm authority. I'm Special Agent Davis with the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. We have a warrant to seize all documents and equipment related to unpermitted extraction activities at Cedar Falls Northwestern Sector. Simultaneous to this pronouncement, additional vehicles arrived bearing state environmental protection insignia and what appeared to be tribal authority representatives. The sudden appearance of multiple regulatory agencies created immediate confusion among Theodore's security personnel, who looked to him for direction. Theodore's composure cracked visibly as he confronted this unexpected development. This is a private corporate matter. Whatever allegations have been made are supported by physical evidence and documentation already in our possession, Agent Davis interrupted, including samples collected last night showing hazardous chemical contamination of waterways. Ben watched in astonishment as the situation transformed. How had federal authorities received evidence that was still in his and Alex's possession? The answer emerged as James appeared at the edge of the clearing, accompanied by Margaret Chen from Breakwater Environmental. Understanding dawned. James had transmitted digital copies of their evidence documentation while they prepared the physical samples. The transmission had reached regulatory authorities in time to mobilize this response, creating the opening Alex needed. As Theodore attempted to regain control of the situation, federal agents presented legal documentation requiring his cooperation. The medical personnel retreated from Alex, unwilling to proceed with detention under such scrutiny. Margaret Chen approached Alex, officially representing her as legal counsel and effectively preventing Theodore from reasserting control. The balanced power dynamic that had existed minutes earlier had completely shifted, with Theodore now facing official investigation rather than orchestrating his granddaughter's detention. Ben remained at the perimeter, watching as the confrontation evolved into structured legal process. Alex caught his eye briefly across the clearing, a subtle nod, communicating both acknowledgement and warning. Stay back, remain uninvolved, protect his position and Maya's safety. The wisdom of this silent advice became clear, as Theodore, cornered, but still dangerous, scanned the assembled crowd with calculated assessment. If Ben revealed himself now, Theodore would immediately target him as co-conspirator and potential leverage against Alex. Instead, Ben retreated to the forest edge, maintaining observation while remaining unidentified. The evidence he carried would reach Breakwater Environmental through alternative channel, adding to the case being built, while preserving his ability to protect Maya from potential retaliation. As federal agents began the process of serving warrants and securing the Cedar Falls northwestern sector, Ben witnessed the culmination of everything he and Alex had fought for, not a complete victory, but a critical turning point that would provide the time and legal framework needed to permanently protect the forest. The battle for Cedar Falls wasn't over, but for the first time since discovering Alexandra Hartwell in that ravine weeks earlier, Ben allowed himself to feel something approaching hope. Whatever came next would unfold under public and regulatory scrutiny that even Theodore Hartwell couldn't easily circumvent. 6 months passed like the changing seasons of Cedar Falls, gradual yet transformative each day, building upon the last until the forest emerged into a new reality. The northwestern sector, once threatened by heavy machinery and extraction equipment, now stood protected under a comprehensive federal environmental review that had expanded to encompass the entire ecosystem. Ben stood at the edge of Cedar Point, watching golden afternoon light filter through ancient Douglas firs. The legal battles following Theodore's confrontation had been complex and often bitter, but the immediate threat to the forest had been neutralized. Federal and state investigations into Hartwell Environmental's unpermitted activities had triggered regulatory oversight that effectively halted all development plans, creating the breathing room needed for permanent protection measures. "Daddy, look what I found." Maya's voice pulled Ben from his contemplation as she bounded up the trail, clutching something carefully between her hands. "It's a Fender's blue butterfly, just like Alex taught me about." Ben knelt to examine his daughter's discovery. Indeed, a Fender's blue, its wings a brilliant azure against Maya's small palms. "Beautiful," he agreed. "Remember what Alex explained about handling them?" Maya nodded solemnly. "Just for a minute, then let them go back to their flowers." She opened her hands, watching with satisfaction as the butterfly took flight, disappearing into the sunlit forest. "When is Alex coming to visit again?" The question had become part of their routine since returning to Cedar Falls. After Theodore's plans had been exposed and the immediate crisis averted, Ben had brought Maya home from his sisters in Seattle. In the months since Alex had visited 3 times, brief, carefully arranged meetings as legal proceedings allowed. Soon, Ben promised, though he knew the complexities behind that simple word. Alex's position remained precarious as she navigated the aftermath of her dramatic stand against her grandfather. She's still helping make sure the forest stays protected. They continued along the trail toward home, Maya chattering about her school project on forest ecosystems. The cabin appeared through the trees, smoke curling from the chimney, a sight that still filled Ben with quiet gratitude after how close they had come to losing everything. Inside, he found an unexpected envelope had been delivered, the Hartwell Environmental corporate logo stark against the white paper. His first instinct was wariness, but Theodore's influence had waned considerably in recent months. The former patriarch now faced multiple federal investigations and a shareholder revolt that had stripped him of operational control. The letter inside was from Hartwell Environmental's new board of directors, formally announcing the company's withdrawal of all development claims to Cedar Falls and the establishment of a conservation trust to manage the land in perpetuity. The decision was described as part of the company's renewed commitment to environmental stewardship and corporate responsibility. Ben recognized the careful phrasing that likely concealed months of behind-the-scenes legal maneuvering and negotiation. While the letter didn't mention Alexandra Hartwell directly, her influence was evident in the comprehensive protection framework outlined, one that included indigenous stewardship, watershed protection, and sustainable research access. That evening, as Maya slept, Ben's secure phone, maintained despite the reduced threats, received a message. "Conservation Trust finalized. Board approved final land transfers. Can we talk?" An hour later, Ben sat on the porch steps watching Alex's car approach along the forest road. She had visited before, but always briefly, their interaction constrained by ongoing legal complexities and the careful distance both had maintained while events unfolded. Alex emerged from the car looking both different and familiar. Dressed in practical clothes rather than corporate attire, but carrying herself with the same quiet determination he had come to know during their alliance. The months of legal battles had left visible marks and new lines around her eyes and a certain watchfulness in her posture. But there was something else too, a groundedness that hadn't been there before. The trust paperwork came through today, she said as she joined him on the steps, the evening forest sounds creating a natural privacy around their conversation. Theodore fought it until the end, but the board finally recognized it was the only path forward after the federal indictments. How much did it cost you? Ben asked the question encompassing far more than financial considerations. Alex smiled faintly. Everything in some ways, nothing important in others. She looked out at the darkening forest. The settlement stripped me of my Hartwell environmental shares and most of my trust fund assets. The family name isn't worth much these days anyway. And Theodore? Facing federal charges for environmental violations, securities fraud, and corporate governance manipulation. The plea negotiations suggest he'll avoid prison due to age and health considerations, but his control of the company is permanently ended. Alex's expression revealed complex emotions about her grandfather's fall. The dynasty he spent his life building will be dismantled and restructured under the settlement agreements. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, absorbing how completely their worlds had transformed since Alex's fall into that ravine 8 months earlier. Maya will be disappointed she missed you, Ben said eventually. I'll see her tomorrow, Alex replied. That's actually why I came tonight, to talk to you first. Something in her tone made Ben turn to study her more carefully. I've accepted a position with the Pacific Northwest Environmental Law Center, she explained. Based in Portland, but with significant fieldwork throughout the region. They've asked me to establish a new division focused on corporate environmental accountability. Sounds perfect for you, Ben observed, genuinely pleased at how she had found a way to channel her expertise and passion. It is, Alex agreed. Alex. But it also means making decisions about where and how I want to live. She paused, seeming to gather resolve. The past 8 months have clarified what matters to me. Fighting for places like Cedar Falls is important, but so is actually experiencing them, being part of them. Ben felt the conversation shifting towards something more personal than their previous interactions had allowed. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm tired of just visiting, Alex said simply. I've found a small house on the edge of town, close enough to commute to Portland when necessary, but here in Cedar Falls. She met his gaze directly. If that would be okay with you and Maya. The question held layers of meaning beyond the practical consideration of proximity. Since their enforced separation and the legal aftermath of their confrontation with Theodore, they had maintained careful boundaries, allies with a profound shared experience, but hesitant to define what might exist beyond that. Maya would be thrilled, Ben said, answering the easiest part first. She asks about you constantly, keeps that butterfly journal by her bed. Alex smiled, genuine warmth replacing the careful composure she typically maintained. And you, I think, Ben began slowly, that Cedar Falls could use someone who understands both worlds, corporate boardrooms and forest trails. Someone who's proven they'll sacrifice everything to protect what matters. He hesitated, then continued with greater certainty. And I think I'd like to know who Alexandra Hartwell becomes now that she's free to choose her own path. The space between them seemed to shift months of unspoken feelings and finding tentative expression. Alex moved slightly closer on the porch step, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. I'm not sure who that is yet, she admitted. I've spent so long being defined by the Hartwell name and everything it represented. Building something different will take time. We have time, Ben said simply. The moment held possibilities neither was ready to fully articulate, but the connection between them, forged through crisis and tempered by shared purpose, had evolved into something neither had anticipated when Alex first fell into that ravine. 1 year later, Cedar Falls celebrated the official establishment of the Cedar Falls Wilderness Preserve, 50,000 acres of permanently protected forest watershed and wildlife habitat. The community gathering at the newly constructed Nature Center brought together environmental advocates, local residents, indigenous representatives, and the team of lawyers who had navigated the complex legal process. Ben watched from the edge of the crowd as Alex addressed the gathering, her role as chief legal architect of the preservation framework, earning her central placement despite her preference for working behind the scenes. Maya sat cross-legged at the front, beaming with pride as Alex acknowledged the contributions of local children in documenting butterfly populations that had proven crucial to the endangered species protections. Preservation isn't just about legal frameworks and conservation easements, Alex was saying, her voice carrying naturally through the room without corporate performative polish. It's about recognizing that some places have value beyond resource extraction or economic development. Value that can only be measured in clean water, thriving ecosystems, and the knowledge that we've protected something irreplaceable for future generations. As the formal ceremony concluded and people mingled around displays showing the preserved boundaries and restoration projects, Ben found himself standing beside Theodore Hartwell. The former corporate patriarch had aged visibly during the year of legal proceedings, his commanding presence diminished but not eliminated by circumstances. "You've won, Ranger Torres," Theodore said without preamble, watching Alex across the room as she showed Maya something on one of the interactive displays. "The forest, the company transformation, my granddaughter's loyalty. A comprehensive victory." Ben considered the older man thoughtfully. Despite everything, Theodore had been permitted to attend the ceremony as part of the settlement agreements, a concession Alex had insisted upon despite resistance from others involved. "It wasn't about winning," Ben replied honestly. "It was about protecting something valuable." Theodore's expression hardened briefly, then settled into something more contemplative. "Alexandra says the same thing. Perhaps that's why she prevailed where her mother failed." He straightened his shoulders, some echo of his former authority returning. "The Hartwell name will be associated with this preserve for generations. Not how I intended to secure our legacy, but a legacy nonetheless." With that cryptic acknowledgement, Theodore departed, nodding briefly to Alex across the room before leaving the nature center. The interaction revealed how completely the power dynamic had shifted. Theodore now the visitor in a world Alexandra had helped create. Later that evening, as sunset painted Cedar Falls in amber and gold, Alex, Ben, and Maya walked along the newly established Alexandra Hartwell Trail, named despite her objections by the Preservation Committee in recognition of her pivotal role. Maya ran ahead, butterfly net in hand, her knowledge of forest ecosystems now extending far beyond what most children her age comprehended. The past year had seen her become a regular presence at community conservation events, often explaining butterfly life cycles to adults with amusing authority. Theodore seemed almost reconciled today, Ben observed as they followed at a more leisurely pace. "I didn't expect that." Alex considered this her expression thoughtful. "I think in his own way he's trying to understand. The world changed around him and he never adapted. Now he's witnessing a different kind of legacy taking shape, not built on resource extraction and quarterly profits, but on preservation and stewardship." They reached Cedar Point as the last light faded, the forest stretching below them in all directions. Protected now and thriving under careful management that balanced conservation with community access. "Do you ever regret it?" Ben asked the question he had hesitated to pose during their evolving relationship over the past year. "Giving up everything you were raised to become?" Alex turned to face him fully, the fading light illuminating her features as she considered her answer. "I didn't give up anything essential," she said finally. "I exchanged wealth and corporate power for purpose and authenticity. Those 11 days in your cabin showed me what it felt like to live aligned with my values instead of against them." She smiled, taking his hand. "Some exchanges are worth any price." Maya called to them from further along the trail, her discovery of a barred owl perched in a nearby Douglas fir, demanding their immediate attention. As they joined her, the three of them watching the magnificent bird surveying its domain, Ben recognized how completely their separate journeys had intertwined into something none of them could have anticipated. Alex knelt beside Maya, helping her record the owl sighting in the nature journal. They now shared, their heads bent together in mutual fascination. The simple moment embodied everything they had fought to preserve, not just the forest ecosystem, but the human connections that gave it meaning. As twilight deepened into night, they made their way back toward the lights of home, Maya running ahead, once more, her knowledge of the trail as intrinsic now as her understanding of butterfly migrations and watershed systems. "She's remarkable," Alex observed, watching Maya navigate the familiar path with confident ease. "So connected to this place, so certain of her role in protecting it." "She had good teachers," Ben replied, "and a powerful example of what it means to stand for something regardless of the bond." The forest enveloped them in comfortable darkness, the sounds of nocturnal life emerging around them, a living testament to what their unlikely alliance had preserved. Whatever challenges the future might hold, Cedar Falls would remain its ancient rhythms, continuing uninterrupted, its waters flowing clean, its complex web of life protected for generations, yet unborn. As they reached the edge of the forest where lights from the cabin welcomed them home, Alex paused, looking back at the darkened wilderness they had risked everything to save. Some people measure wealth in dollars and acquisitions, she said softly. I've learned to measure it differently. In butterfly migrations and owl sightings, in clean watersheds, and ancient trees, in the knowledge that something beautiful continues, because we chose to protect it rather than profit from its destruction. Maya called from the porch, impatient for them to join her, eager to share another discovery from her day of exploration. As they answered her summons, moving from forest shadow into the warm light of home, the journey that had begun with a desperate cry for help from a ravine completed its transformation, not into an ending, but into a different kind of beginning.